Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of American Healthcare: Why Sickness Bankrupts You and Makes Others Insanely Rich by me. I wrote this book. This is from the introduction, the title, How a Single-Payer Healthcare Systems Help Stop COVID-19. Healthcare systems can be national security systems. Just ask anyone from Taiwan. From January 20th, 2020, the United States, or on January 20, 2020, the United States recorded its first known case of COVID-19 infection. The following day, Taiwan got their first one too. By the end of April, over 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. But Taiwan had recorded only 388 infections, and their last case of local transmission was on April 12th. A few had arrived on aircraft from other countries. All were contained by quarantine. As of this writing in September 2020, there hadn't been a single new case or a single death in Taiwan since April. The economy never shut down and, as of this writing, was projected to have grown nearly 2% in 2020. Business, restaurants, theaters, and sports events were all open. Life was back to normal, albeit a mask-wearing normal. And it was made possible by their national single-payer healthcare system and their citizens' willingness to do their bit for the collective good. Back in the 1980s, Taiwan was on the edge of moving toward a democracy after a military coup in the 1960s. And about 40% of Taiwanese families did not have health insurance. If somebody in a family got sick, the cost of care often wiped out that family, and demands for reform were loud across the nation. Yue Reinhardt was a German-born healthcare economist married to a Taiwanese woman, and he attended a conference on healthcare in Taipei in 1989. His presentation impressed representatives of the government in attendance, and while he was still in town for the conference, they asked him for his best suggestion for a national healthcare system. He and his wife went back to their hotel and discussed the issue in depth, finally deciding that a single-payer national system would be the most cost-effective, efficient, and comprehensive program possible. He shared his thoughts with the government representatives, and the next day he left Taiwan to go back to Princeton, where he was an economic professor. 6 months later, though, a representative of Taiwan's government called him to say that they were going to take up his suggestion and asked him to help craft their healthcare program. He enthusiastically agreed, and by 1995, Taiwan had instituted one of the world's best single-payer healthcare systems. Today, everybody in Taiwan is fully covered for doctor and hospital services. Everybody has a driver's license-like healthcare card, which accesses their entire medical history. They can book a doctor's appointment on any computer terminal in the country, and the entire cost of the system is a bit more than 6% of Taiwan's GDP. For comparison, in the United States, healthcare consumes 24% of our GDP. Because there is no insurance company intermediaries sucking profits off the system in Taiwan. When COVID-19 hit, Taiwan chose not to use the blunt force technique of shutting down their economy and locking people in. Instead, they took on the coronavirus with an aggressive nationwide test and contact trace program tied into the National Health Service database. Every infected person was identified and put into a comfortable quarantine, and every person he or she had come into contact with, even very marginal contacts, were also tested and their contacts traced. By April, just a bit more than 2 months after the first case surfaced, the country had the coronavirus isolated and completely under control. By quarantining inbound visitors to the nation island of 23 million, they were able, as of this writing, to keep it that way. Maintaining public health is one of the most important functions of any nation's healthcare system. Because America's is so fragmented, it's inconceivable that our nation could respond to an epidemic, a pandemic, or another public health disaster with the speed and elegance of Taiwan or any of the world's other nations with single-payer Medicare for all types of systems. It's like Stockholm Syndrome, a friend who's a psychotherapist said, describing the way that Americans have clung for more than 5 generations to a for-profit health insurance system, while the rest of the world figured out how to provide health care to all their citizens at a much lower price. People know it and have become familiar with it, she added. They just can't imagine anything else. It's probably the largest con job ever perpetrated on the American people, one that has cost trillions of dollars and millions of lives. It's been going on since the 1940s. If it were a scientific experiment, it would have been shut down by the ethics review panels generations ago. This experiment in providing health care via a for-profit insurance system has led to the deaths of more Americans than we lost in World War II. Every year, over 500,000 Americans go bankrupt, often losing everything they've worked their entire lives for because somebody in their family got sick. That's 500,000 families a year, every year, for the past few decades. And the coronavirus, of course, has only made things worse. Perhaps most galling, this massive ripoff is costing our entire nation and each of us individually a fortune. Insurance premiums right now make up 22% of all taxable payroll, well above what the cost of Medicare for all would be at around 14% when first put into place, dropping down to around 10% within a few years as previously uninsured people get their health needs up to date. As the health insurance, drug, and hospital parasites push their suckers deeper and deeper into our body politic, spending on health care by Americans went up 25% between 2000 and 2014. The book, The Hidden History of American Health Care, by Thom Hartmann.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Wednesday. We will have Congressman Mark Pocan, in fact, with us in just a moment for Middays with Mark. So if you want to give us a shout at 202-808-9925, you can get yourself in the queue for that hour-long National Town Hall meeting. We'll start in less than a minute. In the second hour of our program, Professor Richard Wolff will be with us. Could a post-dollar world be on its way? And also, my rant today over at HartmannReport.com. It's time to enforce the Constitution and ban seditious members of Congress. I do a deep dive into the 14th Amendment and the 6 cases that just in the last year have been brought before judges and commissions and whatnot. 5 of them against members of the U.S. House of Representatives. 1 of them against this state official in Arizona who just lost, in New Mexico. Who just lost and got kicked out of his job because he participated in the insurrection on January 6th. We need to expand that. We'll talk about that in the second hour of the program. Also, Stefanie Miller with the Sexy Liberal Tour is going to drop by. In the third hour of the program, Alex Lawson with Social Security Works is going to be with us. An update on all the efforts that are continuing, even under the Biden administration, to expand privatization of Medicare. This is a friggin' disaster, and I'll fill you in on that. Crazy alert in the third hour. Dr. Oz grilled for not going to the steak aisle, but I know what could have happened there. We'll stay tuned. And will Ron DeSantis get away with his racist voting fraud scam where he's arresting black people for voting after his own officials told them that they could? It's insane. We'll get into that in the third hour of the program. But to start out, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Congress is back in session, or will be soon. I know the Senate is back. Congressman, welcome back to the program. Thank you so much for joining us. And is the House back in session?
Next week, we're back in session.
Next week.
Back this week, we'll be back next week.
Very cool. Okay. So anything on the top of your mind that you wanted to talk about? I know the nuclear documents at Mar-a-Lago are causing everybody's head to explode, but there's a lot of other important stuff going on, too.
You know what? I'll tell you, there's so many things. I don't know which one to highlight. What I do want to let you know, though, is at our Labor Day celebrations in Madison, Wisconsin, here in South Central Wisconsin, I can't tell you how many people, Tom, came up and said to me, I love listening to you on Thom Hartmann. So you've got great. A lot of good, loyal listeners in the working families of South Central Wisconsin. And I just heard so many times, I'm like, I got to share this with Tom because you have a lot of listeners here. Well,
thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. By the way, I should mention Congressman Pocan, who will be with us for the hour here taking your calls, represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin and is a member and the former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's also on the Appropriations, Education, and Labor Committees. His website is pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. Congressman, what do you expect Congress is going to do next week? I mean, what's the first order of business? And is there going to be any effort to deal with or investigate or whatever these nuclear documents and other things at Mar-a-Lago, or are you all leaving that up to the January 6th committee, or where does that go?
Yeah, I'm guessing multiple sources are going to be dealing with that. I think the biggest thing, honestly, that we have to do, our fiscal year ends September 30th, and we're in for 3 weeks. So we have to pass a continuing resolution, likely to December. There's a lot of talk about what else could be in that continuing resolution, just to make sure that we're keeping government open so there's not a shutdown. But, we know Republicans won't lift a finger to help on this. So we've got to do what we've been doing all session, which is, getting a lot of things done. But that's probably the single most important thing, in my opinion, because we can't have a government shutdown. Clearly, we need to keep funding government. And I think Republicans are waiting until after the November election to even have any serious conversations with us about that.
So, serious question here. The Republicans, in a unified bloc in the House and Senate, voted against funding aid to veterans who have been poisoned by these toxic burn pits. They voted against allowing average people to get $35 a month insulin. Blocked that. They basically voted against absolutely everything. Does this represent a governing philosophy? I mean, has the kind of Koch brothers libertarianism completely taken over the GOP, or does this reflect just a vicious obstructionism? Anything that is good for the American people when Democrats are in charge is not good for Republicans, they believe, and therefore they're just simply trying to sabotage all of your efforts. Or is it both?
Yeah, so it's a kind of a mixture. Part of it is everyone's still drinking the MAGA Kool-Aid, right? So they have to wait for Donald Trump to tell them if they can sit or stand or what they can do. And part of it is they want to cause as much obstruction between now and November to try to make a case for them to be back in charge, which so far I don't think they've done. In fact, I think just the opposite. People are now concerned about our democracy more than we've ever seen before, and we've seen that in polling. But they're just pure obstructionists at this point. There is not an attempt to work with us to get something done. Those days are gone. And I think that as long as Donald Trump is still the cult leader, the cult will continue to follow him, even if it's off the ledge of a cliff.
Yeah. I remember back in the 90s when Newt Gingrich started preaching this stuff, and it has now become doctrine, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, let's pick up some phone calls here. Omar in Herndon, Virginia, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Sir Thom Hartmann and Lord Mark Pocan, good day to you both. My question is that, what are we doing? What is the Democrats doing to get more progressive senators? I know we have Elizabeth Warren, and others in there, but we need to get more progressive senators because that's where everything seems to be stalled. So my question to you, what are we doing to get more senators in there? Thank you.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, that's part of where you're going to, I think, break the 50-50 tie is with some progressive-leaning senators in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. I think John Fetterman and Mandela Barnes are two people that exactly fit, what you're looking for, Omar. And those are the two most likely pickups, followed very closely by Ohio, Tim Ryan in North Carolina. So you're actually going to get that. I think you're going to have a better makeup of the Senate after November if things look like they're looking right now. We have to watch, the seat in Nevada and perhaps some other seats to make sure we don't take any slippage as we're moving forward. But you're going to have more people, I think, that are going to be in the vein of Tammy Baldwin, who's, a senator I'm very proud of from my state, who vote very progressively, work very hard for working families, and that is a good thing for progressive values.
Troy in Brooklyn, New York, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hey, guys, how you doing?
Good.
Question. I called the right-wing host regarding a raise in minimum wage in California, and it was speaking of how it would destroy the food industry. I didn't have a tool to go back with them. What I wanted to know, the question I had was, one, is are they allowing the people from the industry on that independent council that would set wages? And two, what can you refer to that would show that it's actually a choice raising wages? They don't have to shut down their business. They can actually choose just to have less profit.
Yeah, I'll tell you, let me address the second part because they're giving you every myth that's out there. I'm an employer. I've had a small business since I was 23 and still have a small business. It's a complete fallacy about this increasing the minimum wage somehow is going to cost jobs. In fact, every time we did it in Wisconsin, more people entered the workforce, which is exactly what we need right now, right? We've got a problem in many areas with jobs, but not people to necessarily get in those jobs. So it's actually a good thing. 90% of businesses already are paying close to that $15 minimum wage rate. It's the laggards that really hold us back, who have people on assistance programs in their states, et cetera, that are abusing the system. So all of this rhetoric is for the people who are the worst people out there for hiring and employment, when most employers already are paying at that level at a minimum anyway. So it makes sense to increase it because it lifts all boats and more money gets in the economy.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us. And by the way, like you said, you can go back all the way to 1935 when the minimum wage came into place. And every time there's been an increase in the minimum wage, I believe it's either 9 or 11 times, every time employment goes up all across the nation. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan. It's 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's talk media for the sane among us. Congressman Mark Pocan with us. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Steve in Winona, New Jersey. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hey, good afternoon, gentlemen. Now, I noticed that we've had some issues where in the past, based off of COVID, that we weren't able to get a lot of products that we normally get from overseas and, stock our shelves or whatever. My question to you is, if we had these jobs created here in the United States, wouldn't that make it so much easier so we wouldn't have to worry about outsourcing all this stuff, having all the outsourced stuff come in? And we wouldn't be in the dilemma where we are now, where we don't have these products and whatnot. And if there's a means that we could take these American-based companies that do all of their manufacturing overseas and possibly maybe mark up a 300% tariff to force them to bring the jobs back to the United States.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, Steve, so you've identified the problem exactly. I mean, we don't make enough things here anymore. Unfortunately, about 3 decades ago, there was this brilliant strategy by some, neoconservative, I think, economists who decided that, we could keep the skilled jobs and higher wage jobs here in the U.S. and make things overseas, and somehow that would work well in the economy. And the reality is, you're always going to need that manufacturing base here in the United States as well. But we sent almost everything over there for cheap labor. But this has been a great example of why that's been a bad choice going through the pandemic. And then when everything globally reopened at once, I mean, clearly that was scarcity. It's economics 101. Scarcity is going to drive the cost of goods up. That's what we've been experiencing, worldwide inflation. And Republicans are just outright lying when they blame it on Joe Biden. It's obviously because of a pandemic that we've experienced across the globe. So other countries are feeling it as well. At least we're trying to do something about it here in the U.S. So the CHIPS Act wants to make sure we're making more computer chips here, which has been one of the problems for vehicles. And obviously our auto industry, it's important. We're trying to do that with the Inflation Reduction Act when it comes to energy and healthcare. So at least we're trying to do something, but you are completely right. We just need to make more things here again. I think that neoliberal, neoconservative, I think it's a cross between those two schools of thought that were really, corporate thoughts about trying to outsource all this stuff just to have cheaper labor so the people on top can make more money, has failed us. And now we need to have a real strategy around making things here in the United States.
Yeah, this is the essence of my next book, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, that'll be out in a week or so. Is there any, we just have 40 seconds here to the break. Is there any appetite among your colleagues in Congress for going back to a tariff-based system like Alexander Hamilton proposed and we had up until the 1980s?
I think we're at the recognition of the problem stage, Tom, honestly. I've heard even Republicans say that we need to make more of our drugs here because so many drugs are made in China and India right now. And right. That clearly could have been a problem through the pandemic. So you're starting to see recognition of the problem. That's the first stage, and that's the important one. And then I think it'll be the solutions, whether it be tariffs or some other ideas that are out there. Some might be incentive-based rather than punitive-based. But we need to figure out how to get things made here again in the U.S. because it's good for our economy and it's good for our consumers. And, the last 2 years have shown that.
And it's good for our workers, too. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour. Middays with Mark, taking your calls. We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Our phrase for the day is narcissistic collapse. This is what happens when a person like Donald Trump with severe narcissistic personality disorder can no longer maintain the facade of their own greatness. When the lies that they have used to build this facade begin to disintegrate, they either implode, typically through drugs or alcohol or other kind of semi-suicidal behavior or even suicide itself. They typically either implode or, more frequently, they explode. They start blaming everybody around them or whatever institutions they can to deny that the collapse is their own fault. They cannot accept the blame. It's part of their narcissistic personality disorder. And instead, they go after the institutions or the people who are pointing out their failure. In the case of Donald Trump, going after the FBI, going after the courts. Look out. This is going to get really, really ugly. I've got a whole long video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Andrew in Detroit, Michigan. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good afternoon, gentlemen, and thank you both for educating us and helping us keep our democracy. My question is, with this judge in Florida, couldn't she be investigated for impeachment, for judicial overreach, and obstruction of justice? Thank you.
Yeah, Andrew, I assume anyone can be for anything. In this particular case, I mean, clearly there seems to be a bias with this judge, but, what we need to really do is focus on the most important aspects of this, which the Department of Justice is trying to do, is look at this information to see what was actually taken, to see if it connects to some other areas, including perhaps to things around January 6th and other areas. And, we can't let anyone, doesn't matter who, Democrat, Republican, former president, abuse the laws of the country. And that's what Donald Trump is trying to do. So this may be someone who's doing a favor for the person who put them in that position. But I think at the end of the day, Department of Justice is doing the right moves, and we have to do this for the sake of our country.
Nola in Inglewood, California. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes, I live in California, 3 miles east of the LAX. The other week, a caller said that the post office is shutting down smaller post offices, forcing people to travel further. And here in the city of Inglewood, they raised the price of renting a post office box to $232 a year to rent a post office box. So I'm wondering, this is going to make it harder for people to get their mail-in ballots. What can we do?
Yeah, Nora, so I mean, one of the things that we have to all remember is that within the Constitution, we talk about the Postal Service, right? A lot of other things that we do in government are not delineated in the Constitution, so it's important that we keep the Postal Service strong. And we did that this year. We passed a postal reform bill that guaranteed 6-day delivery, which was something the Republicans were going after, trying to destroy the Postal Service by doing that. And we got rid of that odd requirement to have to pre-fund employee benefits 75 years into the future, which was really the main thing that was kind of financially, putting a stress on the Postal Service. The next thing we have to do is we've got 2 appointments, I think, coming up between now and December on the Postal Board of Governors that has oversight over Postmaster DeJoy. And President Biden will get appointments, and that's who can get rid of DeJoy. And I think that's what's really needed. He's gotten rid of a lot of processing centers. He didn't make the right decisions originally on electric postal vehicles. There's so many things that he has done that I think were efforts to really privatize the Postal Service. We can't have that. The good news is we did a lot of protections in that postal reform bill earlier this year, but Nora, there's more we need to do, and that means getting rid of DeJoy, and that'll happen through the Postal Board of Governors.
John in Yorktown, New York. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Congressman Pocan. Last night on All In with Chris Hayes, he did a piece towards the end of the show on the potential supermajority in the state legislature in Wisconsin. As we all know, with 2024, Wisconsin is going to be a very important state, I think even more so in that election than in the last one. So I wanted to get your feelings on, is that a likely possibility, or do you think your governor is going to be reelected? What are your thoughts on the state of your politics in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so thank you. I mean, we're ground zero for everything, right? We've got a Senate seat. We have to beat Ron Johnson. He's one of the two most beatable people in the country. Mandela Barnes is running for that. The governor has done, I think, a great job here in Wisconsin, but he's got a very, very wealthy person who's got a $17 million estate in Connecticut where he really lives, running for governor in Wisconsin where he's got a business. We have to keep our governor. But when it comes to the legislature, the gerrymandered maps went through because of a conservative-leaning Supreme Court here, state Supreme Court. And because of it, if we lose 2 seats in our state assembly, the majority could, override any veto that Governor Tony Evers could do in a future legislative session. So it is really important that the Assembly Democratic Campaign Committee, for example, that runs the races, has the support to protect those seats. And with these gerrymandered maps, there's a lot of headwinds right now. So yes, it is very vital. So on top of a Senate race and a governor's race, and also an open congressional seat in the 3rd Congressional District where there's an insurrectionist running, where Brad Pfaff, the Democrat, is running to keep Ron Kind's seat. We've got a lot of activity here, and our state assembly in particular is where we could have problems in holding the veto. So please keep us in your thoughts.
We just have 20 seconds here. Do you think that you might have a large enough majority that you can undo the gerrymandered maps, or is that something that can't be done just routinely?
That's going to come through the Supreme Court, and we have a good chance in next spring to get a seat back, and that might give us enough to be able to fix that. So a lot of attention will be on spring in Wisconsin, too.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Pocan, the former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. You can find his website at Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. And you can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It is Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back after this break with your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan.
Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scop poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, the liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap-and-trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The no climate tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' no climate tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that you all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investment soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%. Dark Money, The Hidden History of the Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right by Jane Mayer.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. It's a national town hall meeting, hour-long national town hall meeting with Congressman Mark Pocan, former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And Patrick in Boston, Mass. It says here you're a Republican with a question for Congressman Pocan. Go for it.
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Tom. I'm a new listener because I don't have Sirius in my old 94 pickup truck. The wife's car's got the Sirius, and I tuned you on, and I was just like, oh, my God, I didn't even know you existed. So I always like listening to, in my verbiage, and I think it was yours when Bush was in the presidency and Trump was, it was a loyal opposition. And I was very disheartened to hear, and this is why I'm actually veering towards calling myself a conservative and not a Republican, but I'm very disheartened to hear the congressman call my affiliation a cult. I'm not an occult congressman. I'm a 57-year-old business owner that employs 45 people that's struggling like everybody else is. And to hear not just you, but the other side have such vitriol and almost hate towards their fellow Americans in Congress, I scratch my head continuously when I watch news. How is anything going to get done? When you think the other side is an absolute raging devil, and then the other side thinks the same way, how can you reach across the aisle and get anything done, Congressman? And that's my anger, if you can hear it in my voice when I hear, I didn't even know you were a congressman, with all due respect. But, you're obviously a congressman in the state of Wisconsin, but when you call Republicans cult members, what happened to the loyal opposition?
Yeah, so Patrick, I'm referring to my colleagues, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Matt Gaetzes, the Jim Jordans, go down the list, who aren't trying to work with us on anything in Congress, even things that were traditionally done in a bipartisan way, like a budget, who now have to wait to see what Donald Trump's going to say because he is so popular among about 30% of Republicans. I'm not saying every Republican. I have a lot of Republican friends, in fact, who are just like you, are real conservatives, and Donald Trump's not. Donald Trump is out for Donald Trump, and he's unfortunately got such influence with that 30 to 35% of the Republican Party that he is able to really, of people, that he is able to manipulate too much of the process. And the Republican candidates, including people like Kevin McCarthy, who wants to be Speaker, will do whatever Donald Trump wants. So that's why I say it's a cult, because the elected officials, my colleagues I serve with, don't work with us like we used to. I've been doing this for almost 30 years. Next year is 30 years in local, state, or federal government. But it's the current Republicans. Matt Gaetz doesn't give a damn about public policy. He wants to get on TV and raise money and right now stay out of jail. Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't even have committees, and she doesn't care because she cares about being on TV and talking about, the MAGA talking points to keep Donald Trump happy. I need more Republicans in the traditional vein of Republicans who may have a different ideology like yourself, a conservative, but still know you got to get something done. The problem is, people like you aren't in Congress right now and unfortunately aren't in the legislatures. Most of them have left, and we're left with the people who are just waiting for Donald Trump to tell them what to do next. So I understand you're upset. You should be. Your party has been hijacked by someone who is a self-serving narcissist who only cares about himself, and it's hurting the things you care about, because I can find what I have in common as a progressive with conservatives, and then we can try to get something done. That's how things always were done. Right now, unfortunately, the Republican Party elected officials don't operate like that.
John in Navarre, Florida. Am I saying that right, John? You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, that's correct, Tom. Thanks very much. Hey, Congressman Pocan, I have a question and a comment about the defense budget. Wasn't there a bill that Representative Lee co-sponsored some time ago to cut the defense budget in half? That's specifically the question. And I'm wondering if you could comment just in general about the power of the military-industrial complex in the Congress. Do you think the average American knows we spend $2 billion a day on the defense budget? Maybe after $2 trillion. Maybe after the next Congress, after the Democrats keep the Congress, maybe the Progressive Caucus could push for some hearings, maybe similar to the church committee hearings in the 70s about exposing the waste and the fraud and the abuse in the Pentagon, about 760 bases overseas, $2 billion a day. And maybe please consider running for president to talk about this. You could campaign on ending the empire, talking about the amount of money that's spent in the defense budget, how similar how Representative Swalwell talked about just guns in his campaign. So I'll hang up and listen to your comment. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, John. So let me do 30,000 and I'll get to your question on the Barbara Lee's bill. Here's the problem. What's happened to the defense budget is it's become a jobs program. Every district has some aspect that's getting money from the defense budget, whether it's a contractor or generally many contractors. And it's hard to get to the common sense place we should be. We don't really have real oversight like you should, like we do with every other bit of federal spending than we do on defense. We don't audit the Pentagon, for example, and it absolutely should be audited. It wouldn't pass an audit. And that's why many of us, Barbara Lee and I, formed a Pentagon Spending Reduction Caucus to try to address those issues. We got about 95, give or take, votes when we tried to cut the budget 10%. So that was a good start, we thought, and it'd start the conversation. Barbara Lee did have a bill. I don't know if it was a full 50% cut, but it was a significant cut that, if we can only get 95 people on 10% cut, that's why I think we've been trying to focus on how else can we raise awareness. I think the best way we may want to move forward on this is to realizing that it's a jobs program in many members' minds, is changing the definition of national security and defense and how we spend defense dollars. Because I think anyone would argue in the last 2 years, the biggest national security threat we had was COVID-19. And if we could change just a few words where money goes in our defense spending to include things like pandemics and climate change and cyber attacks, then we could actually be spending those dollars wiser than the way we do now. We don't really put that much into our troops, and we've always said don't cut money going to our troops. But it's these defense contractors and the merging and the no-bid contracts and the multiple, all the stories we hear about the problems and waste that's out there. That needs to be talked about. So Barbara has had a bill that had a deeper cut. I'm not sure if she's reintroduced it or not, to be perfectly honest. But we know based on that 10% cut where we're at with members, and we're trying to get people just like yourself to reach out to your members of Congress and say, why aren't we auditing the Pentagon? Why do we have amphibious vehicles that only sink? Why does the most recent class of aircraft carrier, when there's a clog in the toilet, you have to flush $400,000 worth of acids down the toilet in order to make them unclog, literally flushing money down the toilet? There's nothing more visual than that. So you're right, John, on the big issue, and we're going to keep working towards that, and we will absolutely in the next session.
Mark in Long Beach, California. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Mr. Pocan, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for taking my call. You're a kind person. I got a simple question for you, and I hope it makes sense to you. A bill was passed by the House, such as the voting rights and a few other bills, but failed in the Senate. After the elections, if the Democrats pick up 2 more seats and are able to pass certain bills, because they'll be able to break the filibuster with 2 more, does the bill have to be voted on in the House again, just in case the Republicans control the House? Passed by the House, will it become law?
No, we have to. If it's a new session, we have to pass it again in the House, which is why I think the fall is going to be busy post-election, regardless of what happens, whether we retain the majority or not in the House. I do think the Senate, as you said, has a chance to pick up some seats. Really, the problem is, more than anything, Mark, the Senate is living by rules that were created when people in the Senate largely wore powdered white wigs to work. We don't do that. There's still plenty of people who wear wigs in the Senate, don't get me wrong, but not of the powdered white variety. They need to modernize their rules to get to a place we can get things done. Unfortunately, the filibuster has been misused in its current form. We need to have filibuster reform to get that done. Fortunately, people like Mandela Barnes in Wisconsin are running on that issue, but we need to have some changes to really get things done in the way we need to. Don't forget, even if you have 52, we can get things done through reconciliation with 50 votes that are fiscal in nature, but we'll never pass the PRO Act, for working families. We'll never pass a bunch of other bills, voting rights, that don't have a fiscal impact. Otherwise, we have to get those rules modernized to meet where we need to be.
Paul in Ambler, Pennsylvania. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Congressman Pocan. I'd like to know if you see Congress seriously pushing forward the policy of universal community college and public colleges being tuition free. The recent debt forgiveness is certainly a part of the problem, and a lot of the pushback is that there are those people who it doesn't affect who have college debt still, and what about future generations? President Obama and President Biden have both put forward plans to expand universal education to include community college and public colleges, so that we won't have future generations. So to deal with the whole issue, we really have to push that policy through to implementation. Do you see that happening in the next 2 years, provided there is a Democratic Congress, of course?
Yeah, Paul, you just brought up exactly what I'd say. It really depends where the majorities are. There's no question Joe Biden in his Build Back Better agenda included much of that, what you're talking about on community colleges. In fact, it's a priority of Jill Biden, I can tell you, and the president's going to do everything he can. He said he's still behind his original agenda with Build Back Better. I think one thing I'd like to add just on this pushback that some people are saying we shouldn't have forgiven debt because not everyone's going to benefit. Not every bill we pass in Congress benefits every single person. The infrastructure bill is going to create 1.5 million jobs that'll help people in skilled trades. The Inflation Reduction Act, while many aspects will help everyone, it's going to help more seniors on their out-of-pocket expenses for medication and by negotiating for drug prices through Medicare. The PPP loans largely supported small businesses. And when you do what the president did on loans, you're helping people who are the younger folks who just got out of college so they can help get those jobs and stimulate the economy by buying homes and cars instead of just paying down debt. Not every bill has to help every person, but cumulatively, we have to keep everyone in mind. And that's what we've done, and we've proven it this session.
Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour in a National Progressive Town Hall meeting, Middays with Mark. Congressman Pocan represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. You can see a former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, currently a member, of course. You can find his website at Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. It's 46 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Bill will be right back with your calls for Congressman Pocan. And welcome back. Joe in Kokomo, Indiana. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yeah, looking back at, hi Tom and Congressman Pocan. Looking back at like 2016, one of the major issues was that Trump didn't release his taxes. I think, because it was like just a custom. It's something that we did in history, but I was wondering whether we could finally legislate that you must release your taxes for how many years if you're going to run for president. I was wondering if that's a possibility, because it seems to me like if Trump would have been forced to release his taxes, he wouldn't have never been elected. So,
yeah, I hear you, Joe. I mean, I think it's a good idea to have to be able to show those taxes, especially at that level. The good news is one of the committees, I believe it was Oversight and Government Reform, just passed through enough of the legal fight that they've had to be able to get his tax returns. So hopefully there will be more awareness through the committee on anything that he may have once again lied to the American people about. So I think there's some progress on that front, but I agree with you. It's something that we should be able to have to know who we're electing.
Greg in Sherman Oaks, California. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Tom. You and I have met out here in Los Angeles. Representative Pocan, we have not, but I look forward to it one of these days. The question that I wanted to throw out there is, in conjunction with what we were talking about earlier about jobs and outsourcing and a healthy labor market and wages here, it seems that the federal government and state governments have a huge consumption base. Can we actually look forward to establishing an economic industrial policy for this country?
Yeah, absolutely, Greg. In fact, one of the things is, there's I believe it's a presidential requirement that our different branches of the military buy in the United States, because obviously some of that technology you don't want leaking out there. And yet, I think the Coast Guard's probably been the biggest violator, and some others, of not buying, for example, ships. Well, Wisconsin, we make a lot of ships. We make a lot of engines. And in fact, in my district, Fairbanks Morse makes these big engines for some of the biggest ships that are out there. And that's all good family-supporting unionized jobs right here in the United States. And you're right, we should use the power of our purchasing. That's why when we finally did that with Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices, it should have been a no-brainer, but it took this long to finally get to that point for Democrats to be able to get it done this session. But we absolutely need a policy that has more things made here. It's in our national security interest. It's in our economic interest. And we need to do much more to get back to that. Again, that neoliberal, neoconservative thought from decades ago was very wrong-headed. It's been proven wrong over and over, and we need to change that.
I think you're referring to the Buy America Act that was passed during Franklin Roosevelt's time, and it allows the president to grant waivers.
Yeah.
And that's something that Reagan just started doing, like, writing these waivers like they were toilet paper. I mean, just over and over and over again. And really, no president has stopped doing that. Do you know if the Biden administration is pulling back on that?
I don't know, and I will look into it, Tom, but I know that certain agencies, like the Coast Guard, has been a really big violator of following that.
Yeah, but I believe if they're violating it, they have to do that with authority from, maybe from a past president. I don't know the nuance of the law. I probably should do a deep dive into it. Congressman, we'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Back during World War I under President Wilson, we had a windfall profits tax on war profiteers, essentially, of 95% above their normal profits. You were allowed to make your normal profits, but when you started making more than that, 95% tax on that income. President Franklin Roosevelt revisited the exact same thing, windfall profits tax, during World War II, saying he didn't want this war to produce any new war millionaires. During the Korean War, Dwight Eisenhower had a windfall profits tax. During the echo of the fall of the Shah of Iran, when all the Iranian oil was taken off the marketplace and the price spiked, President Ronald Reagan imposed a windfall profits tax on the oil and gas industry to stop exploitation of that. Now we have Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate and Ed Markey as well, along with him, and Representative Jamal Bowman in the House saying, let's do the same thing now. There's a whole video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Jim in Tampa, Florida, listening on WMNF. Hey, Jim, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hello, Tom. Hello, Representative Pocan. Number one, let me say that I have learned so much in history from you, Mr. Hartmann. You are an extraordinarily wonderful person. Your mind and the way you bring things to the people is great. Congressman Pocan, Tom, you can come down now.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, you're welcome. I don't want to get your head too big here. Anyway, Congressman Pocan, number one, Val Demings and Charlie Crist, please, somebody start supporting these people. We need Val Demings in there and Charlie taking over for governor. And Congressman Pocan, there's a windfall elimination provision for all the federal retirees like me from the Postal Service. I have a lot of Social Security time. Even when I was working at the Postal Service, I worked part-time in different jobs, stretching myself to the limit. And the windfall elimination provision, there's a bill now that has been put in by, I think, somebody from Missouri, I'm not sure, but a Democrat in the House. Any response on that or any kind of legs it has right now?
Yeah, Jim, I don't know offhand. I'd have to take a look at the bill, and because it hasn't come through my committees, and I don't think it's gone through any committee yet. I don't really have a good answer for you, other than obviously I think it's important, and we've fixed part of the stuff for the postal system, right, with the Postal Reform Act earlier this year. Now we need to, I think, make employees completely whole through this too. And I don't have an exact update on what the status of that bill is.
Don in Chicago, you're on the air with Representative Pocan, and we're down to about a minute and a half, I think, maybe 2 minutes.
Okay, quick. Well, thank you for taking my call. From Chicago, born and raised, Democratic. And the crime in Chicago has been unbelievable. I mean, over the past year and a half, we have our city's Democrat run, all our higher officials, are Democratic. Yet the crime's gotten worse and worse. And also the Democratic politicians here have been basically made the Democratic Party the party of defund the police because they were so quiet on all that and basically supported it by not talking. And that's a lot of the police, the union, the firemen in Chicago are so against this. This is really going to hurt the Democratic Party, I believe, in the upcoming election, the fact that they were afraid to say anything.
So what's your question, Don?
My question is, how do you feel about that, defunding the police?
Yeah, I think you read the incorrect talking points of the Republican Party very well, but it's simply not true. I mean, there have been some crime spikes through COVID. We know that, and so some of the numbers are up from that. But, the real party that's not respecting law enforcement right now is the party attacking the FBI, is the party attacking the Capitol Police, right? I mean, so Fox News is good to watch, but there is something on your remote that allows you to change the channel occasionally. Don, I just really recommend you do that because I think you'll get more information than what you at least just read to me.
Scott in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Scott, we got about a minute. You got a quick question?
Yes, real quick. In March, the Senate had passed the Sunshine Protection Act, I believe it was called, and I haven't heard anything about the House taking up a similar bill to finally get that through, and we are running out of time. I was wondering if you could give me an update on that.
Yeah, Scott, I don't, and I will look into that and try to make sure next time I'm on, I give you an update on it. We are in for 3 weeks, not this week, but the following 3 weeks, and the Senate's in this week, and I think the same overlap on weeks. I just don't know the status offhand.
Congressman, in the 20 seconds or so we have left, what should we be paying attention to in the coming weeks?
We're back in session for 3 weeks. And then, honestly, it's all about November. I mean, who has the majority is going to make the decisions moving forward. You can have a Democratic president, but if you don't have a Congress that can work with them as productive as we did this session, you're just going to go back to stalemate and the same old that, Donald Trump and the Republicans want. So, this is sprint period to the election. Get active, get involved. Don't be a spectator.
Tag, you're it. Okay. Congressman Mark Pocan, thank you so much for dropping by.
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you.
Always great having you on here. Middays with Mark, with Congressman Mark Pocan. We'll be right back. Professor Richard Wolff is going to drop by. Could a post-dollar world be coming? Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We take life back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Business by Christopher Leonard. This is from the prologue. It's titled The Hidden King. Nobody ever visits the stranded little community of Waldron, Arkansas. But even if they did, a tourist would never see the place for what it really is. Most outsiders would be fooled into thinking it was an actual small town. On any given morning, the residents awaken and begin their routine along Main Street. Old men park their pickup trucks by the curb in front of the Rock Cafe, which opens early for breakfast. As the cafe's booths and tables fill up, a congregation of old-timers in cowboy hats gathers in a loose ring of aluminum chairs out front, smoking and talking and stubbing out their cigarette butts in a bucket full of sand. Later in the morning, Chambers Bank in the south end of town opens up, and the tellers cheerfully greet customers by name. On Thursday at noon, the livestock auction opens in a cavernous barn on the north side of town, drawing crowds of ranchers who haul steel trailers behind their trucks, with cows staring out between the horizontal slats. In the late afternoon, teenagers park their cars by the gazebo south of the auction barn, proudly displaying their Mustangs and Broncos like big game trophies. These events have a rhythm of their own, the clockwork functioning of a small-town economy. But it's all just window dressing. All of it would cease to exist in a moment and have no impact whatsoever on the true Waldron or its true economic reason for being. The real tempo of the town's economic pulse is measured by the coming and going of semi-trucks that roll down Main Street at periodic intervals, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the middle of the night, tanker trucks full of animal feed rumble past the empty stores and out onto country roads that lead into the hilly terrain that surrounds town. At dawn, other trucks trundle in from the hills, heaped high with battered metal crates full of chickens that exude clouds of white feathers along the highway. The tempo can be measured in the regular arrival of train cars full of grain and oil seeds that dump their loads at a feed mill that clanks and hums and churns all night. And in the parade of refrigerated trucks that pull up to a slaughterhouse near the feed mill and get loaded with pallets of frozen meat. This is the real functioning of Waldron, Arkansas, and its true reason for being. This is the heartbeat of Tyson Foods, the nation's biggest meat company. The Tyson plant on the north end of Waldron is the only thing that keeps the town on the map. Appropriately, many residents simply refer to it as the complex. That's because the Tyson plant isn't just a factory, it's more like an entire small-town economy consolidated into one property. The complex contains its own feed mill and hatchery, its own trucking line and slaughterhouse that covers several acres of land and processes about 1 million dead chickens a week. The complex is like an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses, an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses that used to define a small town like Waldron, the kinds of businesses that were once the economic pillars of rural America. Of course, tourists to Waldron would never see the Tyson plant, and not just because it sits on the north fringe of town away from Main Street. Visitors are stopped at its front gate and forbidden from exploring its grounds. So a tourist would have to be content to stroll along the sidewalks downtown, observing the fake Main Street, the deceptive array of little businesses that make it seem like a community. This illusory appearance cloaks Tyson's existence all the way from its roots in rural America to the grocery store shelves and restaurant menus where its products finally reach American consumers. The average shopper is usually fooled when he or she peruses the meat aisle, seeing what appears to be an abundance of choices and products. Tyson brand name wouldn't necessarily stand out with its logo gracing just a handful of products. But the rotisserie chicken slowly turning in its oven, the Bonisi brand pepperoni, the Lady Astor brand chicken cordon bleu, the frozen chicken pot pie, and the Wright brand bacon all come from the same company, Tyson. And then there is all the unlabeled meat that Tyson floods into the U.S. food system every day. The meat served in cafeterias, nursing homes, fast food restaurants, and suburban eateries where more and more Americans eat their meals. There's a very good chance any of the meat purchased in these places was made by Tyson. Even if Tyson did not produce a given piece of meat, the consumer is really only picking between different versions of the same commodified beef, chicken, and pork that is produced throughout a system that Tyson pioneered. Tyson's few competitors have resorted to imitating the company's business model just to survive. This book aims to explore the vast hidden territory between the remote farms and towns like Waldron, where Tyson raises millions of animals, and the final point of contact where consumers buy the company's meat. Unseen between these two poles is a hidden power structure that has quietly reshaped U.S. rural economies while gaining unprecedented control over the nation's meat supply. Just a handful of companies produce nearly all the meat consumed in the United States, and Tyson is the king among them. The company sits atop a powerful oligarchy of corporations that determines how animals are raised, how much farmers get paid, and how meat is processed, all while reaping massive profits and remaining almost entirely opaque to the consumer. Because Tyson and its imitators are based in the geographic and economic fringes of America in forgotten places like Waldron, the company has managed to escape the scrutiny it deserves. While Tyson's operations are remote, the company's business practices affect virtually everyone. About 95% of Americans eat chicken, which means they almost certainly eat chicken produced by Tyson. And then it goes on from there. The book is The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Industry by Christopher Leonard.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So the European Union is struggling with Russia cutting off gas supplies to Germany and thus to much of the rest of the European Union. The UK, this has become a big issue in their politics. The Baltic states appear to be taking the worst of it. You've got 76% inflation right now in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania pushing into the 60s. What is Europe planning on doing about these energy prices and frankly, the energy crisis? And to what extent does interfering, to use a popular conservative word, interfering in the marketplace, that is to say, offering subsidies or price supports to consumers or actually directly inserting itself into the energy marketplace, what are the side effects of that? How does that work out? What's going on here with the European Union and energy prices, and how might it affect us here in the United States? On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books, including The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, now available as an ebook, and the host of Economic Update with Professor Richard Wolff right here on Free Speech TV, democracyatwork.info, Prof. Wolff with 2 Fs on Twitter. Professor Wolff, welcome back. I'm wondering if you can fill us in on how the European Union is dealing with or hoping to deal with, or how they could best deal with this energy crisis that is probably going to, really earn that title crisis by the time it starts getting cold here and in the next few months.
Well, I'm afraid rather than dealing, I think the better word would be reeling. They don't know what to do. They're running around, spending half their time yelling, crisis, crisis, no heating oil in the winter, no gas to power our offices and stores and factories. They are in a major economic crisis, no question about it. They are going to be tested, each of the countries and the union they've tried to create with much difficulty. That looks like a daunting task, especially now that the new government in Britain is even worse on the question of demonizing Europe than Boris Johnson was during his time. So the unification process has at best been set back. Here is the basic issue, and there is no nice way to avoid it, even though much of the media is working hard to do it. It's not the war in in Ukraine that's the problem. It's the sanction package. It's the decision of the United States and many of its allies in Europe to punish Russia, or if you like, U.S. Defense Secretary's words, weaken Russia as a response to get them either to withdraw their troops or to go back home or whatever it is they're thinking of getting. The Russians are clearly not about to do that, and the Russians turn out to have ways of coping with sanctions that were not anticipated. Let me remind everyone, President Biden and the top officials of this government the leading bankers at J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs were all of one voice, predicting that the Russian economy would collapse in a matter of weeks. These were things that were said in March and April as the sanctions program were announced. None of that has happened. Instead, the countries imposing sanctions saw that it took the inflations they already had and made them worse. And there's no really end of this. The Russians turned out to have other people to sell oil and gas to around the world. Most countries in the world either support Russia or are neutral. They are not siding with the West. We may be observing a visible crisis in what's happening in Europe because they're impacted first. They depended most on Russia and for oil and gas. They are seeing the prices of those at many multiples of what they were as little as 6-12 months ago. They are facing, therefore, a worse inflation and the coming cold winter. But behind the scenes of that visible, the invisible one, so far, ought to worry Americans, if anything, more, because it's a shift in the balance of power. What the West is able to impose, in this case, on Russia, turns out to be as ineffective as what the Trump regime tried to impose on China with the tariff wars and the trade wars that were called the mother of all sanctions when they were imposed, just like this current one is even bigger mother of sanctions imposed on Russia. If what has happened in the first 6 months is any indication that economic problems got worse in the countries that do the sanctioning than they did in the countries that were sanctioned, wow, then we are watching a much bigger crisis unfold, which is a real realignment of where the growth and strength of the world economy is and where it isn't.
So, regardless of the wisdom of imposing sanctions on Russia for their brutal slaughter of thousands of Ukrainians, completely without provocation. Setting that issue aside, how we should respond to it, this is the response that's happening. And, as you point out, in the UK has got 10% inflation right now. The worst is Latvia, at 76%. What are the solutions with regard to energy prices that the Europeans are proposing to use, and what might be the consequences of those? Are we going to see, a continued inflation spike? What happens if governments come in and say, okay, we'll pay part of your energy bills? Does that just simply subsidize people to continue using larger quantities of energy than they should? On the other hand, if they start getting rolling blackouts or they start asking people to dial back their thermostats, obviously there are political consequences to that. How does all this work out economically? We had this debate during the Nixon time with this wage and price controls. How does it, but that was here. How is this going to play out in Europe in your mind?
At this point, it's total chaos. One government says one thing. Give you just a few examples. The German government is proposing to literally distribute 65 billion euros. That's about the same now as dollars to its people as a kind of generic, we're going to help you, we're going to help you, we're going to help you. Doesn't solve the problem, but it shows you how desperate politicians are literally grabbing around. In France, there's a rediscussion of whether they might open nuclear facilities or expand them. The Germans might reopen them. They were in the process of closing theirs. In Spain, they're washing their hands of the whole thing, hoping somehow, it's a mystery how, they're going to escape, I guess, by finding other sources of oil and gas. They weren't as reliant as other Europeans were on the Russians and so on. And then you have the Baltics, which are spinning out of control, and a British government that seems to want to pretend it has it all under control. They are threatening their people with lowering thermostats, with having interruptions in electric service for certain hours of the day. And you're right, Tom. They're also beginning to realize that they don't have many weapons. And the one they were going to use and are using, like here in this country, raising interest rates, is very bad for the same mass of the people that have been suffering from inflation. So they're not going to be happy with this added problem. You are really building up an explosion, and they don't know which way to go.
Yeah, well, keep an eye on this one. Professor Richard Wolff, always great talking with you. Thank you so much for dropping by today.
My pleasure.
It is 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day. And also my rant about it's time to enforce the Constitution and ban seditious members of Congress. I'll tell you about that right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Up and you win the water cooler wars. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Betty in Corvallis, Oregon. Hey, Betty, what's on your mind today?
I have a question that's been bothering me. If these special classified documents are kept under lock and key, how is it that Trump was able to take highly classified documents, including the one about another country's nuclear secrets? If they're under lock and key, how does he have access to them besides boxes and boxes and boxes of them?
You have to wonder, was there an inside agent? For example, Mike Flynn, when he was the National Security Director under Donald Trump, was also being paid by the Turkish government under the table. He was convicted of that. That's a crime. And he lied about it, by the way, to Congress and to the administration. So he was basically a secret agent of a foreign power. Mike Flynn was, General Mike Flynn. And he had access to these kinds of documents. And therefore, possibly he's the one who funneled them to Trump, and possibly he did that on behalf of the government of Turkey or on behalf of, he was being told what to do by the government of Turkey, but it's entirely possible that Erdogan, who's a dictator himself, was told by Putin what he wanted. I don't know who in the White House might have been working with Trump to get him these documents. Obviously, he had the power to simply call up the machine, essentially, the Pentagon, and say, I'd like to see so-and-so. But then there would be all kinds of, fingerprints and tracking of that, when the document was checked out, who took it with them, where it went. I guarantee you, Betty, they are trying to figure this out right now. And I'm guessing, in fact, I would bet that what we're going to find is that at least some of these documents, particularly the ones that Putin and Erdogan and Mohammed bin Salman would most like to lay their hands on, those ones were not simply an effort by Donald Trump. They were a collaborative, in my mind. My guess is we're going to find that this was a collaborative effort that involved people in the United States who were actual traitors to the United States, as Mike Flynn has been demonstrated to be. And that's how it happened. But right now, we just don't know. Betty, thank you for the call. Robert in Greenville, North Carolina. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Doing all right. Well, Trump is going to delay, deny, and lie on his way to coup number 2. What are we going to do about it?
Well, frankly, I think we should be putting him in jail right away. He's got this Trump-humping judge who literally was just making stuff up. She said in her ruling yesterday, she said that the Biden administration had not expressed an opinion with regard to presidential executive privilege, which is a complete lie. The Biden administration came right out and said, we do not recognize executive privilege claims made by Donald Trump since he left the White House. He has no authority to do so. We've got to deal with this judge who's, BSing us on behalf of her patron, Donald Trump. And that's going to be interesting to watch. In many ways, as I mentioned yesterday at some length, I'm very optimistic. I think that, a new time, a new era is coming. But we've got to clean up the crimes of the past. I mean, it's amazing, Robert. It makes sense?
And we need to go after the Lindsey Grahams and all the people that are supporting him.
Oh, yeah, his enablers, you know, Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, yeah, the whole bunch of them, hopefully we can do it just by voting them out of office. But frankly, I think that some of them we should be bringing the weight of the 14th Amendment to bear on, and I'll tell you about that right after this. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Back in 2018, Pastor Dave Barnhart of the St. Juania United Methodist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, delivered a sermon that is worth revisiting. He said, "The unborn are a convenient group of people to advocate for. They never make demands of you. They are morally uncomplicated, unlike the incarcerated, addicted, or the chronically poor. They don't resent your condescension or complain that you're not politically correct. Unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money, education, or childcare. Unlike aliens, they don't bring all that racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. They allow you to feel good about yourself without any work at creating or maintaining relationships. And when they're born, you can forget about them because they cease to be unborn. It's almost as if, by being born, they have died to you. You can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth or power." The whole clip is over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. 21 minutes past the hour. So my rant today, or my daily take now, I've cleaned it up a little bit, over at HartmannReport.com, is titled, "It's Time to Enforce the Constitution and Ban Seditious Republicans from Congress." So far, well, let me start at the beginning here. After the Civil War, in 1868, when the 14th Amendment was signed into law, or was ratified by the states and became part of our Constitution, the 14th Amendment has 5 provisions in it, and the third provision says that any person, any elected official who, quote, "shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion," end quote, against the laws, against the United States and the laws of the United States, quote, "or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof," end quote, that elected official may not, quote, "hold any office, civil or military, including those who are, quote, a member of Congress or a member of any state legislature or an executive or judicial office of any state." Now, so far, 5 Republicans in the House of Representatives have been brought up, or have been, people have tried to bring them up and get them expelled from Congress for their participation in and support of the treasonous act of January 6th. One guy has actually been kicked out of his job. It just happened very, very recently, this day before yesterday, in fact. And that, this is very straightforward. Let me see if I can get to his name is Coy Griffin. And he was the easiest to prosecute. He was a city commissioner in New Mexico. And he was the easiest to prosecute because, under the 14th Amendment, because he was actually caught in the act on January 6th. He was inside the Capitol building. He was prosecuted for this. He was convicted. Excuse me. He was convicted and, of trespass. I mean, he got probation. He did not attack anybody. He wasn't a violent participant in January 6th, but he was there. And so now a judge has said, okay, Coy Griffin, you cannot serve on this city commission. You can't do it anymore. Sorry, got to go. Now, in all probability, this is going to be appealed. But so far, as I said, 5 members of Congress, we have tried, various other members of Congress or whatnot have tried to challenge them. That would be Madison Cawthorn, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar, Andy Biggs, and Jim Banks. In the case of Madison Cawthorn, that went before U.S. District Judge Richard E. Myers II. He's a Trump-humping Federalist Society judge. And he said that this law that was passed in 1872, see, the 14th Amendment was passed in 1868. By 1872, Ulysses Grant is president, and the Klan is starting to make a major comeback or explosion, basically, in response to Reconstruction and black people running for political office. And Grant, the Republican president, and the Republicans in Congress at that time decided that enforcing the third provision of the 14th Amendment against members of Congress, former Confederates, was actually just driving more and more people into the arms of the Klan. It was working out worse than they had hoped. And so they passed this thing called the Amnesty Act of 1872. And basically what it said was, unless you actually picked up a gun, if you were just supporting the Confederacy in Congress, you can stay in Congress. Now, what this judge did in the Madison Cawthorn case is said that Amnesty Act of 1872 wipes out the third provision of the 14th Amendment. Now, I don't agree with that. Most legal scholars don't agree with that. Ron Fine, who is the legal director of Free Speech for People, who was one of the litigants in the Madison Cawthorn case, he said, according to this court ruling, the 1872 amnesty law, by a trick of wording that nobody noticed at the time or in the 150 years since, completely undermines Congress's careful decision to write the insurrectionist disqualification clause to apply to future insurrections, which is patently absurd. But anyhow, Madison Cawthorn got away with it. Marjorie Taylor Greene's case went to Fulton County Superior Judge Christopher S. Brasher, who recently retired after being caught in court shouting at a black woman in ways that were, shall we say, not really a judicial whatever. And he said there's no evidence to show that Representative Greene participated in the invasion itself. So she got off on that. Congressman Jim Banks, who is a major Trump supporter, he was hauled up before the Indiana Elections Commission, and they ruled, hey, no big deal. They let him go. And in the case of Biggs and Gosar, these two Republicans from Arizona, in both cases, an Arizona judge argued that even though the Constitution outlaws this kind of behavior, Congress never passed implementing legislation to define how the courts should deal with it. And so therefore, only Congress can deal with this, and it should be through impeachment. And so basically, he threw it to Congress. So now we're at 5-1, right? We've got 5 Republican members of Congress who have gotten away with treason or their sedition. And we have this one guy, this one city commissioner in New Mexico who got nailed for it. I'm suggesting that we need to go after more members of Congress. Now that more and more evidence is coming out with January 6th, it's time to hold these people accountable.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And the details of who they are and how that can be done or should be done is all over at HartmannReport.com. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Common Sense for the 21st Century by Roger Hallam. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. This is from the foreword. I was there for the past 20 years. Climate activism. It didn't work. We protested in our hundreds of millions. It didn't work. We raised billions to reach people and politicians. It didn't work. We signed countless online petitions. They didn't work. We looked to the United Nations to resolve the crisis. It didn't work. We trusted progressive politicians and their reforms. That didn't work. Al Gore had a big concert and a PR campaign. It didn't work. Countless NGOs, non-governmental organizations, did their best, and it didn't work. I worked with green NGO campaigns, champagne environmentalists, and lying politicians. I was wasting my time. I had a clue back in 2007 that there might be a fundamental flaw with the reformist approach. The problem with the political influence of the industrial billionaires like the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel bosses. It was another warm night in Los Angeles. I was invited to an exclusive event. A Tesla Roadster prototype was going to be shown to press and guests. We took turns riding around the block. I watched in amazement as the Tesla was at the end of the street in the blink of an eye, with barely a sound. I felt like a caveman seeing a television. Incredible. While I was working on a campaign in 2007, I had an idea for how to save the world with a massive music event and a huge fundraising effort led by celebrities to fund the biggest PR campaign to save the environment. It would be a huge global event, just like Live Aid. I sought out a prominent journalist at the Tesla event to tell about my scheme and bask in the glory of his praise. The journalist was Vijay Vithswaram from The Economist, now a life member of this Council on Foreign Relations. After listening carefully to my concept, he smiled and laughed. I was stunned. Laughter? How could I be so wrong? Vijay wasn't being cruel or unkind. He thought I was naive. He said, "The fossil fuel industry has enough money to outspend any public relations campaign you might try by 100 times. He carried on talking, but I had stopped listening. I had my answer. He was right. Crestfallen, I sheepishly nodded and walked away. Over the next 12 years, I watched as fossil fuel companies used their vast financial capital to buy political parties, trick NGOs into fruitless schemes like the U.S. Cap and Trade Initiative, sow doubt about climate science in the public discourse, and slow policy reform to a snail's pace. Their strategy worked. As climate skepticism continued to spread, climate change mitigation dropped down voters' priorities. With Trump and Putin in power, it was over. I quit climate campaigning. Then I heard about Extinction Rebellion closing 5 bridges in London. Then they closed central London in April 2019. This was something different. I met Roger Hallam and he explained his ideas for a radical plan to create real change. This included, first, tell the truth. Climate skepticism was pushed by the mainstream media, which spread doubt on climate science like a plague, leaving inaction in its wake. The scale of the crisis is being played down, and we must get the truth out. Second, nonviolent civil disobedience. We need to get arrested, tens of thousands of us, more. No more protests, no more petitions. Instead, nonviolent civil disobedience, lots of it, and on a large scale. Close down cities until the politicians take action, or until the people do. Third, universalism. In other words, the ecological and climate crisis should not be owned by any political ideology, culture, age, or gender. As Roger Hallam says, we all have a stake in the future. We should all be allowed to engage in action. I was convinced. We need a new approach to save ourselves and the planet. We need to spark a worldwide rebellion. We need some common sense for the 21st century. That foreword was written by, quote, anonymous climate activist. So this now is the introduction to the book. It is time to grow up and see the world as it is. There are some things which are undeniably real. There are some things we cannot change, and one of those is the law of physics. Ice melts when the temperature increases. Crops die in a drought. Trees burn in forest fires. Because these things are real, we can also be certain about what the future holds. We are now heading into a period of extreme ecological collapse. Whether or not this leads to the extinction of the human species largely depends on whether revolutionary changes happen within our societies within the next decade. This is not a matter of ideology, but of simple math and physics. The United Nations has estimated that we need to reduce carbon emissions by half within a decade to have a 50% chance of avoiding a global catastrophe. Of course, this is likely to be an underestimate, as recent science shows permafrost melting 90 years earlier than forecasted, and Himalayan glaciers melting twice as fast as expected. The book, Common Sense for the 21st Century, by Roger Hallam, the co-founder of the Extinction Rebellion. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at ThomHartmann.com if you want to really support our program. 34 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Just to kind of close the loop, the subsidies and whatnot that I was talking about with Professor Wolff, and kind of wondering out loud what will be the economic consequences to these countries of this, are in the United Kingdom, every household is getting a £400, it's about $500 more or less, discount on their energy bill. Funded in part by a 25% surcharge that they're slapping on the windfall profits of oil and gas companies. In Italy, and by the way, I'm getting this from Americans for Tax Fairness's Action Fund. In Italy, a 10% windfall profits tax was raised to 25% to help families out with their energy bills. They're providing $200 in direct payments to poor families, and they are investing in renewable energy. In Spain, a windfall profits tax was passed all the way back in September of last year so that they can reduce the VAT tax on energy bills from 21% down to 10%. So by lowering the tax on energy bills, they're lowering energy bills. And Romania and Bulgaria are doing essentially the same thing. And this is something we could do here. A windfall profits tax on the big oil companies. I mean, they just had the best quarter that they've ever had, a couple of them in their history. I mean, they're making out like friggin' bandits. So, I think it's entirely possible. And I don't, whether or not it's going to cause dislocations to economies, I think that's, really a secondary issue compared to the importance of, A, punishing Russia for their brutal attack and occupation of parts of Ukraine, and B, getting us off fossil fuels. I mean, this is a real crisis, the whole fossil fuel thing. So, all that said, let's pick up your phone calls here. Nikki in Chicago. Hey, Nikki, thank you for calling. What's on your mind today?
Hi, I just was calling because your previous speaker was talking about the sanctions and whatnot that we've done on Russia. And my thing is that I don't think we're doing enough. I think we should be behaving like we're at war because we are at war. Democracy is being attacked. It's something that we need to protect, whether it be our country or another country. And maybe it's time for rations, or maybe it's time for us to behave a little more like we did during World War II when I wasn't there, but I heard the stories when we had to really, suck it in.
Yeah.
That was.
Yeah, I totally get it, Nikki. It's the problem is largely a political one. If we were to start rationing energy, if we were to impose, a larger tax on fossil fuels, even if we were able to cycle that money back to people, which is something that I've been an advocate of for a long time, frankly, is, a carbon tax where all the revenue from the carbon tax is given to people who earn less than X, $70,000 a year or something. Then even those, I think that would be probably a politically palatable solution, but even those are things that Republicans completely oppose. They deny that there's global warming. They deny that there's a crisis. And now, you had a whole bunch of Republicans who just voted to deny any kind of military aid to Ukraine. So, they're certainly not going to participate in trying to sanction Russia. And you've got Republicans like Rand Paul, who have basically been in Putin's pocket for years, in my opinion. And, it's a tough one. But I'm with you. What Russia has done in Ukraine is a crime against humanity and should not be allowed to stand. Nikki, thank you for the call. Candace in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Candace, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
I have a theory. I really liked your theory, and it really dropped my jaw about Mike Flynn.
How Trump got the nuclear secrets without anybody knowing?
Yes, how he knew what to pick.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And my theory about Judge Cannon is I wonder who she consulted with over the weekend to make her announcement on Labor Day. Was it Gorsuch? Alito's tortured opinion rings true to how she could have gotten those 24-page opinion. So I have a theory she had help and direction.
And who do you think helped her? You think it was one of the right-wingers on the court?
I do, or I think it was the Federalist Society.
Yeah, because she was. I mean, there were a couple of things in her brief, in her opinion, that were just not true. I mean, she said that the Biden administration has not weighed in on executive privilege, and they absolutely have. They've said Trump has no executive privilege, and yet she said that, there's 11,000 documents here and the FBI can no longer use them for prosecutions or investigations until a special master has looked at them for executive privilege. There is no executive privilege here. I mean, that's just wrong.
The best part is they want to preserve his reputation. I mean, that's the best part. Who wrote
she
that?
was talking about reputational damage to Donald Trump as a consequence of all this.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think, frankly, I think if she had gone to Alito or Gorsuch, I mean, those guys are smart enough, they know the law well enough, and they have people working for them that she wouldn't have ended up with this, pathetic. I mean, she made mistakes in this decision that had a lawyer made them and submitted them to a court could be disbarred. I think that she just did this all by herself to kiss the feet of the guy that gave her a lifetime job at the age of 39.
Absolutely. And Alito's opinion on overturning Roe is a pretty good example of stupidity, too.
Yeah, I agree. Although, again, he had, he largely had his legal ducks in a row. I mean, quoting, witch-burning authorities as how the law should be is kind of dicey. But he wasn't
from the Middle Ages, right?
Yeah, exactly. But he wasn't making the kind of just amateur legal mistakes that even people who aren't lawyers like me can, I'm not a lawyer is what I meant to say. Even people like me who aren't lawyers can look at that and say, well, I know that's not true. I mean, everybody knows that's true. We remember when the Biden administration came out and said that they were not recognizing, executive privilege for former presidents, specifically Trump. And yet she wrote it into her opinion. There's something skeezy here, and I have a feeling that she's freelancing on this. And I have a feeling that she released on Labor Day in the hopes that it would get no news coverage.
Like a Friday dump.
Exactly.
But I think she just wants to get in line for the Supreme Court, and she's gotten a good head start there if Trump gets back in, which God help us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Trump's not going to get back in, but DeSantis is even worse. So.
Oh my God, is he terrible? I'm in Florida, so yeah.
That's right. You're in St. Petersburg, so you know. Okay, Candace, thank you. Thank you for the call. Good talking to you. Yep, good talking with you. Albert in Hartford, Connecticut. Hey, Albert, what's on your mind today?
Hello?
Albert?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good. What's up?
Hey, man, this whole thing with Trump is just crazy. The special master, the whole situation, that's just nuts, man.
Yeah, I agree.
At the end of the day, if you have regular incarcerated individuals in the federal system, so that means each one of those individuals can request a special master. Meaning that if you get caught with drugs or whatever the case is, you're going to request a special master. So in case, they got your wallet in there too, so the special master can come in.
Or in case there might be a letter from your lawyer stuck in with the kilo of cocaine.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense at all. This guy is getting all of the benefit of the doubt, and this lady just made a complete mistake. I just hope the DOJ appeals it, man.
Yeah, I do too, Judge Cannon. I hope they don't just appeal it. I hope they blow it up and then, somebody calls for her to be impeached. I mean, or at least held to account before, whoever. I don't know who she's accountable to, but at the very least, the Bar Association. Yeah, I'm with you. Albert, thank you. Well said. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Yeah, I was calling. I was watching Morning Joe this morning, and they had this op-ed guy from the Post who, I guess he put up a op-ed 2 days ago.
From the Washington Post?
Yeah, Jason Willick.
Mm-hmm.
And he was trying to relate back in the 1950s and then the 60s and 70s how the experience of the left is the exact same experience of the right now.
Oh, I read that op-ed. I disagreed with it, but I read it.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's outrageous. And, luckily Eddie Glaub was there to say, what are you talking about? That's the period where we got rights and all this good stuff. So, I was just embarrassed by the guy. Can I mention one other thing?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Yeah, these documents, any document that they have a question about is gone. And we're going to have to spend billions of dollars to rebuild whatever we have to do in order to save ourselves, because there's no way we know who saw them or anything. I don't know why Donald didn't just take pictures of them and put them back,
Well, we don't know that he
did.
didn't do that. He might have taken pictures of them and sent them to Putin. That might have been in what was in the envelope when Rand Paul in 2018 or 2019 made his secret, mission trip all by himself to Russia to hand an envelope full of something over to Putin's intelligence service.
Right. But lastly, there's the intent of the law and there's the letter of the law. The letter of the law can have loopholes or whatever drilled into it, because it's like a pathway, like your nerves. It's a power line, and the intent is a data line, and the intent should never be violated. I don't understand how they don't make more of the intent. I guess it has to go to the Supreme Court to understand the intent of the law, but I don't know why they have so many ways of getting around what was, promised in the law.
What's going on right now, Bill, is that everybody, the courts, the Department of Justice, everybody at every level is doing everything they can to cut Donald Trump as much slack as possible. And, typically the rationale is this way, when we finally nail him, nobody will be able to say that it wasn't fair and we didn't try everything. Of course, that's not how it's going to play out. But Bill, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It is 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back in just a moment. I think Stefanie Miller is going to drop by for a few minutes, so stick around. And welcome back. And let's see here. Lamont in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. Hey, Lamont, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV.
Okay, Tom. Tom, I'm a little confused about all the fanfare over paper. This is not 1942. It's 2022. And everything that Trump has been electronically stored. So they knew when he left office that he had those documents and they were stored. So anything that he had that they had to amend, they already amended it. So
well, that's a big question, Lamont. I mean, there are people in the federal government who are saying we had no idea he had this stuff, and had we known a year and a half ago, we would have behaved very, very differently.
Yeah, but I think that the fact that. No, because we got people languishing in jail now who tried to pass thumb drives to the Russians.
Reality winner, one page, one document. That by the way was showing that the Russians were supporting Donald Trump in the 2016 election, and the Trump administration nailed her, and she got 5 years in prison.
Yeah,
she
that's
just
what
got
I'm saying.
out.
And there's more people in jail because of that. So they're able to transfer documents electronically through thumb drive. So all this paper stuff is like, I don't even know why people making all this fanfare over that. So
because it's our nation's most sacred secrets, as it were. I mean, that's.
Yeah, I know, but all that stuff is electronically stored, and
well, I don't know if that's true, Lamont. I'm guessing that a lot of the stuff that they think is like secret, they are not electronically storing specifically so that it can't be compromised that way. I mean, a lot of these documents, like this nuclear secret document. Apparently, this wasn't just. You can't leave the skiff, the secure room. It has to be in a safe in a skiff. And that's why I'm speculating that Trump had to have there had to be an inside man. Somebody was pulling these documents on behalf of Trump or on behalf of somebody else. And I think it was General Mike Flynn, personally, although, I may well be wrong. But Mike Flynn was the director of national intelligence. At the time, he was taking money from a foreign government and lying about it. And essentially spying for a foreign government. The foreign government was Turkey. He was working on behalf of Erdogan. Erdogan has had numerous meetings with Putin. He's friends with Putin. Erdogan himself has turned into an autocrat. And I'm wondering if Putin had a laundry list and he conveyed it through Erdogan to Mike Flynn, along with the $700,000 Erdogan gave Mike Flynn, as I recall, maybe it was $500,000. And Mike Flynn pulled those documents and got them into Donald Trump's possession, where they'd sit down at Mar-a-Lago. Trump hasn't even been there throughout the summer. He's been up in New Jersey So they've been sitting there with nobody, watching them. No, but the place has been open. Anybody can rent a room there, and I'm guessing that place was crawling with Russian intelligence officers.
Yeah. Well, again, Tom, I just think that when people want to pass documents electronically, they can do it, and you have to have secret codes in order to do that. Because I work for the pharmaceutical industry, and they do it all the time. They don't let nothing paper go out any place.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Okay. That's very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Lamont. Good point. It's 49 minutes past the hour. We're going to check in with Stefanie Miller about a really fascinating and fun gig that's coming up. We'll tell you all about that in just a second. Stick around. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. An amazing new report out from the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution suggesting that cars and trucks. It turns out that cars and trucks that burn fossil fuels produce little teeny tiny particles. They're called PM 2.5 because they're smaller than 2.5 microns. Essentially microscopic, that bury themselves deep inside your lungs and then migrate to the heart, the brain. They cause damage throughout the body. They can even cause lung cancer and heart disease and things. And guess what? Electric cars produce none of this. Also, when you hit the brakes on a regular car, you're burning your brake pads and throwing particles out into the air. On an electric car, you hit the brakes, you're slowing it down with the motors. There's a video about the whole thing over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. On the line with us is my friend and colleague, Stefanie Miller, host of The Stefanie Miller Show on Free Speech TV, Sirius XM, and radio stations all across the country. Steph Miller Show on Twitter and sexyliberal.com/tour on the internet. Stefanie, welcome back. Tell us about the Sexy Liberal Tour.
Well, it doesn't get any this, Tom. I'm talking to you from a nursing home in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I had finished feeding my mother ice cream.
Oh, sweet.
Talk to you.
Sweet. Give her my best.
I will. I am on my way to D.C. Oh, my God, there's nothing going on in the news, right?
Right.
I'm actually calling you from inside a safe in a skiff to tell you the classified information that Sexy Liberal is coming to D.C. Sidney Harmon Hall, Tom.
Okay. So is this Sidney Harmon Hall and it's this Saturday, right?
It's this Saturday. Glenn Kirshner, Carl Frisch, John Fugelsang, Hal Sparks. We're working on a couple of classified surprises that I can't tell you.
Wow,
All right, they're nuclear related. All right, have to kill you.
Okay, yeah, I wouldn't want that. So if you are in or you can get to Washington, D.C. this Saturday, Sidney Harmon Hall, you can see. This is always such a great show. The Sexy Liberal Tour is back on.
It's not just the Sexy Liberal Tour. It's the Sexy Liberal Save Democracy Tour, Tom.
That's
so it will be only 3 shows to save democracy: D.C., Chicago, and L.A. That's it.
Right. So when are Chicago and Los Angeles?
Chicago, September 24th and October 22nd in L.A. And we have, Chairman Adam Schiff and Rob Reiner and Jan Schakowsky and Jill Weinbanks, and there's always a lot of surprise guests.
Holy cow.
Well, anyway, we're excited to kick it off in D.C., though. So this is like, we used to always think it's hyperbole about saving our democracy, but this time it's true, right?
It really is. It really is. This is such a consequential election this year. So sexyliberal.com is the website?
Thank you, sir. Yes.
And people can tweet you.
Did you ever think we'd be having a previous president under investigation for espionage? Did you think we'd be having that conversation?
When Trump was elected under the shadow of Putin putting him in office, and particularly when we learned that Paul Manafort was giving confidential inside campaign information to the Russian intelligence services so that they could direct their Facebook trolls and literally target on a city block by city block basis the swing states that he needed to win the Electoral College. At that point, I was hoping that we'd get to the point where we started investigating this guy. But I mean, you know,
you feel like. Don't you feel like this is going to come full circle, Tom? What they're going to find, I'm sure Russia is among the places he shared classified information with.
I'd bet money. And I generally don't. I would bet money on that. And frankly, and you might have heard it in the last segment. I think that somebody on the inside is participating in this. The candidate that comes to the top of my mind is Michael Flynn. I mean, who provided the shopping list of documents to get? That was probably Putin. How did he get that into the? How did these documents get into Trump's hands? I don't think Trump, frankly, has the competence to get these documents. But Mike Flynn did, and he had access to them as Director of National Security, or National Security Advisor, rather, excuse me. And he was a secret agent for a foreign government at the time that he was the head of our national security, and lying about it. By the way, I mean, he was convicted of this, and Trump pardoned him. But I could see Putin giving a shopping list to Erdogan, Erdogan giving the shopping list to Mike Flynn, Mike Flynn giving it to Trump, Trump getting the stuff down to Mar-a-Lago, and then we get a week or so ago we learned that there was a woman who was a Russian spy who was, playing golf with Donald Trump, staying at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, coincidentally.
Just coincidentally. Your dad ran for vice president with Barry Goldwater. I can't imagine your father or, Bill Miller or Barry Goldwater back in the day even imagining that the Republican Party would ever do this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Tom, I'm going to go visit my dad's grave in Arlington, as I do whenever I get to D.C. And, he's buried right near Kennedy, the eternal flame. And it just, I can't even imagine, what, I don't know how this even got partisan. These are traitors to the United States. This is not partisan. This is, they find Trump's fingerprints by, there's Cheeto dust and ketchup on the nuclear secrets, but it's,
it was stuff.
I mean, it's the party. It's the party that's the disgrace, Tom, that they have stood with him, knowing what this is.
It really is. This is not my father's Republican Party or your father's Republican Party. This is something completely different. And Congressman Pocan earlier called it a cult, and he obviously wasn't referring to the entire party, but a lot of the Republicans are even dropping their association, with the party. They're just saying don't even call me a Republican anymore, which is it's like, what are we going to do with this? I mean, we've got a two-party system, and one party has gone nuts.
You always think, and you think here's the thing they won't excuse finally, and you're like, nope. Nope. Insurrection, overthrow of the United States government, espionage now. Like, nope. They're just going to, fake news and double down, right?
We need an intervention. Stefanie Miller, the great Stefanie Miller, the Sexy Liberal Tour is coming to Washington, D.C. this Saturday at Sidney Harmon Hall. You can find all about it at sexyliberal.com. Stefanie, thank you.
You're the sexiest of all liberals, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you for wearing the patriotic thong. I got you.
You're welcome.
Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say fight back!
book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Common Sense for the 21st Century by Roger Hallam. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. This is from the foreword. I was there for the past 20 years. Climate activism. It didn't work. We protested in our hundreds of millions. It didn't work. We raised billions to reach people and politicians. It didn't work. We signed countless online petitions. They didn't work. We looked to the United Nations to resolve the crisis. It didn't work. We trusted progressive politicians and their reforms. That didn't work. Al Gore had a big concert and a PR campaign. It didn't work. Countless NGOs, non-governmental organizations, did their best, and it didn't work. I worked with green NGO campaigns, champagne environmentalists, and lying politicians. I was wasting my time. I had a clue back in 2007 that there might be a fundamental flaw with the reformist approach. The problem with the political influence of the industrial billionaires like the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel bosses. It was another warm night in Los Angeles. I was invited to an exclusive event. A Tesla Roadster prototype was going to be shown to press and guests. We took turns riding around the block. I watched in amazement as the Tesla was at the end of the street in the blink of an eye, with barely a sound. I felt like a caveman seeing a television. Incredible. While I was working on a campaign in 2007, I had an idea for how to save the world with a massive music event and a huge fundraising effort led by celebrities to fund the biggest PR campaign to save the environment. It would be a huge global event, just like Live Aid. I sought out a prominent journalist at the Tesla event to tell about my scheme and bask in the glory of his praise. The journalist was Vijay Vithswaram from The Economist, now a life member of this Council on Foreign Relations. After listening carefully to my concept, he smiled and laughed. I was stunned. Laughter? How could I be so wrong? Vijay wasn't being cruel or unkind. He thought I was naive. He said, the fossil fuel industry has enough money to outspend any public relations campaign you might try by 100 times. He carried on talking, but I had stopped listening. I had my answer. He was right. Crestfallen, I sheepishly nodded and walked away. Over the next 12 years, I watched as fossil fuel companies used their vast financial capital to buy political parties, trick NGOs into fruitless schemes like the U.S. Cap and Trade Initiative, sow doubt about climate science in the public discourse, and slow policy reform to a snail's pace. Their strategy worked. As climate skepticism continued to spread, climate change mitigation dropped down voters' priorities. With Trump and Putin in power, it was over. I quit climate campaigning. Then I heard about Extinction Rebellion closing 5 bridges in London. Then they closed central London in April 2019. This was something different. I met Roger Hallam and he explained his ideas for a radical plan to create real change. This included, first, tell the truth. Climate skepticism was pushed by the mainstream media, which spread doubt on climate science like a plague, leaving inaction in its wake. The scale of the crisis is being played down, and we must get the truth out. Second, nonviolent civil disobedience. We need to get arrested, tens of thousands of us, more. No more protests, no more petitions. Instead, nonviolent civil disobedience, lots of it, and on a large scale. Close down cities until the politicians take action, or until the people do. Third, universalism. In other words, the ecological and climate crisis should not be owned by any political ideology, culture, age, or gender. As Roger Hallam says, we all have a stake in the future. We should all be allowed to engage in action. I was convinced. We need a new approach to save ourselves and the planet. We need to spark a worldwide rebellion. We need some common sense for the 21st century. That foreword was written by, quote, anonymous climate activist. So this now is the introduction to the book. It is time to grow up and see the world as it is. There are some things which are undeniably real. There are some things we cannot change, and one of those is the law of physics. Ice melts when the temperature increases. Crops die in a drought. trees burn in forest fires. Because these things are real, we can also be certain about what the future holds. We are now heading into a period of extreme ecological collapse. Whether or not this leads to the extinction of the human species largely depends on whether revolutionary changes happen within our societies within the next decade. This is not a matter of ideology, but of simple math and physics. The United Nations has estimated that we need to reduce carbon emissions by half within a decade to have a 50% chance of avoiding a global catastrophe. Of course, this is likely to be an underestimate, as recent science shows permafrost melting 90 years earlier than forecasted and Himalayan glaciers melting twice as fast as expected. The book, Common Sense for the 21st Century, by Roger Hallam, the co-founder of the Extinction Rebellion. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the third hour of our program. The Mitt Romney's Trust Act, basically, in my opinion, a Trojan horse to cut Social Security, is floating around the Senate again. Let's check in with our old friend Alex Lawson, the executive director of SocialSecurityWorks.org and StrengthenSocialSecurity.org. ALaw202 is his Twitter handle, or SSWorks. And find out what the deal is here. Alex, welcome back to the program. It's been too long since we've talked.
It has, Tom. Thanks for having me.
It's always a pleasure, Alex, anytime. So first of all, the Trust Act, what is this?
So what the Trust Act is just, politicians who want to rob us of our earned benefits are also cowards. They won't just come out and tell us that they want to cut Social Security benefits because they know they'll lose if they do that. So what they want to do is set up an unaccountable commission behind closed doors that does that cuts Social Security benefits. That's what the Trust Act is. And you said, it's coming back, but the truth is, as you know, Tom, it just has never gone away. I mean, the people who want to do this, they're always here in Washington, D.C. The Republicans just down the line, they want to destroy Social Security. But the dangerous part is the Wall Street faction of the Democratic Party who also want to do something like this. Now, there's not many of them anymore, but we always have to be worried about a setup where you have a divided, if there's a Democratic White House and then a Republican-held Congress, that's a really dangerous setup for Social Security. And Trust Act is the so-called Trust Act is the weapon that they would use to get at it.
Are you talking about the so-called Corporate Problem Solver Caucus, Josh Gottheimer and his buddies?
Yeah, and it really does come from the Republican side. Republicans want to cut Social Security and Democrats want to expand Social Security. But as well as I do, Tom, that when it comes to divided government, that's when triangulation starts being bandied about, and the very serious people start coming and pushing their ideas about deficits and how we can't afford things. We saw this during the Obama years, and a sort of, an easily led astray White House. We saw for basically 6 years, we had 2 years of governing with Obama. And then for 6 years, we had to fight off attempt after attempt after attempt to cut our earned benefits. And they usually came in the form of something like a commission. So that's what the Trust Act is, and that's what we have to be on guard against.
They're basically trying to reinvent the Greenspan Commission of 1983, as I recall, that added income taxes to Social Security, that almost doubled the Social Security tax that we all have to pay, and that lowered the Social Security eligibility age or raised it rather to, it's going to be 77, I think, ultimately?
67, yeah.
67, excuse me. Yeah, thank you.
Which is just a 16% benefit cut, as you know. Right. Each year it goes up. It's just a straight benefit cut. Something like that, but it's actually more akin to the BS commission under Obama, the Bowles-Simpson commission.
Oh, geez.
Where, you know, they propose things that are even less obvious, like the so-called chain CPI, right? The whole idea is they don't want people to know what they're doing to Social Security. So they hide it behind confusing things, which is why it's so important that you're calling it out here. When I got to testify in front of the Senate Budget Committee, I got the chance to call it out to Mitt Romney's face, which he was very angry about. That's what's going on. We can't let them pretend that that's not what they're talking about with the Trust Act.
We're talking. Go ahead.
They are planning on cutting Social Security. If the Trust Act moves forward, that's what that means.
And we're talking with Alex Lawson, the executive director of Social Security Works, socialsecurityworks.org. Alex, you know, this is pretty grim. The other thing that I've been watching, and I wanted to get an update from you on the status of, is the ongoing privatization of Medicare. Obviously, you know, they want to privatize Social Security. They haven't found a wedge yet to do that. But in 2003, as I recall, correct me if I'm wrong, George W. Bush and the Republicans and a few of these corporate Democrats in Congress figured out a way to privatize Medicare with the so-called Medicare Part C, so-called Medicare Advantage. I know Ro Khanna and Mark Pocan are working on legislation to forbid insurance companies from using the word Medicare when they're selling these private insurance policies to seniors. But that's just a small step, and I'm sure it'll be fought tooth and nail, even if that gets anywhere. But what's the status of the efforts to continue and expand the privatization of Medicare, including some of the programs that are being run right now inside the Biden administration?
Yeah, you know, I actually am very hopeful that we can defeat attempts to cut Social Security. I really am, Tom, because we're in a different place than we were with the BS Commission. I don't think that Biden is going to willingly go down the path of letting the Republicans, you know, just keep creating crises to come after Social Security. He's doing great work on Social Security right now. He just asked for extra hundreds of millions of dollars for it. That being said, the privatization of Medicare is continuing at pace. It's extremely scary to watch happen. We're getting right to where the private insurers are making up just over 50% of the system. And that's a real tipping point. They can then control so much of the market that they can start dictating things like hospital groups not allowing and not taking traditional Medicare patients. And we just have report after report that what they do is what private insurers always do. What they only can do, the only way they make money is by denying care. And people think that they're on Medicare. They think that, you know, this means that if they get sick, they get the care that they need. But they maybe didn't even know that they signed up for a private plan, you know, called Medicare Advantage. But what that means is just a private insurer who's going to deny care. And the last time they looked at it, Tom, they found 13% wrongful denials of care across the whole system. Now, we figure that there are some plans that maybe have lower rates of, you know, wrongful denials. We think there's some like good guy plans. That means that there are some plans that are denying 1 out of 3 people wrongfully. And we know that what that means is that people can die. Wrongful denials of care, prior authorizations, all of these different ways of saying not giving you the health care that you need in hopes many times that you do die, because then you don't cost them any money. And that's why we can never allow private insurance to take over traditional Medicare. And unfortunately, we're right at that tipping point right now with Medicare Advantage.
Yeah, it's about half of all people who think they're on Medicare are actually on Medicare Advantage, on private health insurance that, you know, basically the only association with Medicare is that Medicare pays the bills to the insurance company.
Exactly.
And then the insurance company, you know, tax on their 30% profit. So forgive me for forgetting the name of the program, but there's this experimental program within the Biden administration right now that is looking to involve physicians' offices and hospitals with basically signing people up for Medicare even if they don't want it. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so it was called DCEs, and really, with your help, we scared the administration enough about it that they did put on some guardrails, and they renamed
direct
it
contracting entities.
Direct contracting, yeah. And then now they're going to call it the REACH program, so they changed the name. That's a pretty classic trick. But at its root, right, you can't reform this system, and that's the point. You know this. The private insurers, you can't add them into the system and save money, right? Like that doesn't happen. What happens is they deny care. They don't know how to deliver good care more cheaply. All they know how to do is deny care. And so that leads to both wrongful denials of care, but also they charge more than traditional Medicare. So as is often the case with this sort of like corruption, it's both cruel and stupid, right? It's cruel because it hurts people, but it's stupid because the whole idea they sell is that it saves money. But you and I know, and every time they look at it, these corporations just rob the Medicare trust fund as well. So they're denying care, and then they're overcharging to do that. It's really the worst setup that you could imagine.
What's the pressure point? We're talking with Alex Lawson, the executive director of Social Security Works. What is the pressure point? How do we reach out to members of Congress? What kind of language should we use when we call, for example, 202-225-3121 and get our member of the House or one of our two senators on the phone or a representative from their office? What in a short, concise way can be said?
What we need to do, and what our ask is right now, is we're demanding that our members of Congress tell us who are the bad actors in Medicare Advantage, and we actually exclude them from the system. So we'll even say, you don't have to get rid of the entire MA system, because that's a tough lift right now. We think it's the right thing to do, but maybe your member's not there yet. Well, your member has to be there for at least getting rid of the bad actors in the system, the people who we know are hurting people right now. That is their job. They can't tell us, some plans are denying care of 1 in 3 people, but we're not going to tell you who that is. That's ridiculous. It's their job to make sure that their constituents are protected from these bad actors in Medicare Advantage.
Yeah, I get it. So let's start looking into the companies that are selling Medicare Advantage programs that are fraudulent or that are just bad, like you said, bad actors. Alex Lawson, Executive Director of Social Security Works, socialsecurityworks.org, ALaw202 on Twitter. Alex, thanks a lot for dropping by. It's always great talking with you.
Thanks, Tom.
Great talking. We'll be right back. I got a crazy alert, and is DeSantis going to get away with racist voting fraud?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Or should I say election fraud? We'll be right back. And welcome back. And let's see here, Bob in King and Queen Court Hills, Vermont. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
That's King and Queen Courthouse, Virginia.
Oh, Virginia. I'm sorry.
We were neighbors in Vermont, Tom.
Really?
You were in Montpelier. I was in Warren.
Oh, yeah.
And it's funny that Stefanie was on just now, because I spoke to you briefly at one of her shows in D.C. You probably remember me, maybe not.
So what's up?
Anyway, in the Constitution, and I've got more highlights in this book than you can imagine, but in Article 3, the Judicial Branch, Section 1, just a little ways down, it said, the judges, both the Supreme and inferior court, shall hold their offices during good behavior.
Right.
Now, I don't know if we can define the term good behavior, but that lady certainly didn't behave well in that thing that she did in lying and
That's why I think she should be impeached.
Right on. And that goes for a whole bunch of them. So I don't hear anybody talking about that particular passage, and I stumbled on it myself. But anyway, I used to listen to you on Ken Squire's station, right? On Saturday.
WDEV.
It was music to go to the dump by with
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, anyway, Tom, that's it. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, that was a good one, Bob. I appreciate the call. Thank you. It's nice to hear from you again. Adam in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Adam, what's on your mind today?
Hey, thanks, Tom. I was just wondering if all these actions that Trump has taken that appear to be criminal and nothing ever happened to him is white privilege. What do you think?
I'd say it's probably more wealth privilege than white privilege, but, you know, he's got privilege stacked on privilege. There is,
But
go ahead.
Oh, he's actually not wealthy, though. He's bankrupt, isn't he?
Who knows? I mean, you know, he apparently made over $1 billion during the 4 years he was in the White House. God only knows how much he stole from our government. And not only that, if he has been shoveling secrets to the Russians or the Turks or Saudi Arabia, I'm wondering if the $2 billion that Jared got and the $1 billion that Steve Mnuchin got was just the tip of the iceberg. Did Trump get $5 billion? Is it sitting in a Panamanian bank account, an offshore bank account? You know, nobody knows. Right. And nobody, to the best of my knowledge, nobody's even looking into it. But something skeezy is going on, I'll tell you that.
That's the thing about your statement. Nobody's looking into it. There's a YouTube channel I watch called The Young Turks, and they always...
Yeah, Cenk is an old friend of mine.
Yeah, they always characterize Democrats as cowards, spineless, just really weak individuals. And it just seems like Trump, with every crime he commits, it's almost like Lucy pulling the football from Charlie Brown. It's like, oh, he used campaign money for a porn star. Now we've got him. And yank, nothing ever happens. Oh, he went to Zelensky and
I wouldn't blame that on the Democrats, Adam. And I'm not a fan of circular firing squads. But I'll tell you, there are Democrats who are taking this stuff seriously. There are Democrats who are aggressive about prosecuting these people. I mean, look at the January 6th Commission. It's mostly Democrats. They're not going to let go of this. And I want to know, and I think everybody else wants to know, how much money did Trump make selling our secrets, and to whom did he sell them? Because there's no doubt in my mind he didn't take nuclear secrets to Mar-a-Lago just because he thought it would be fun, or just so he could show them off to people at a wedding to brag about what he had access to. There's something going on here, something really big. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, welcome back. 22 minutes past the hour. Our crazy alert for the day. Dr. Oz was grilled for not going to the steak aisle. This is very, maybe they're trying to clean up something, his old crudité thing. This is Brett Baier on Fox News. He asked him he asked Oz, if he regretted his crudité, not just saying vegetable plate, right? Why do you have to use these fancy French words? And in fact, John Fetterman had tweeted, or he told supporters at a rally on Monday, he said, in the Mon Valley, we make steel. In New Jersey, Dr. Oz makes crudités. And Oz says, oh, he's way out of bounds. Far left on many of his positions. But Brett Baier says, come on, be honest. Do you wish you went to the meat aisle and picked up a steak or called it a vegetable platter? And Oz says, no, I'm proud of the many things I do. And now, this is over on Drudge. It's popped back up again in a radio interview that Oz did a couple of years ago, apparently, where he said that incest is not a big problem. And as long as it's more than a first cousin away. Right. And John Fetterman is retweeting that, saying, yet another issue where Oz and I disagree. Oh, poor Dr. Oz. But that said, he still has a chance of being the next senator from Pennsylvania. There's billionaire money behind him. There's the GOP behind him, and they don't care about any of these issues. Meanwhile, we've got another large issue down in Florida. You've got Ron DeSantis, who created this Let's Go After Black People Who Vote unit. He created a police agency in the state of Florida specifically to go after ex-felons who might have voted. It turns out, and he arrested 19 of them, most of them, the vast majority of them black, and released the photos of the black ones the black people that he found who had, quote, voted illegally. All of them, it turns out, or the vast majority of them anyway, this was 19 or 20 people, all of them were told by Florida officials, this was, after the state held a statewide referendum on whether ex-felons should be allowed to vote, and the people of the state said yes, they should. And then the Florida legislature got into the act and said, well, we're going to tweak that. Now you got to pay off your fines first, and you got to jump through these hoops, and you got to fill out this paperwork, blah, 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 to make it hard for people to vote. And then a number of these people were actually told by, they get the driver's license, or they call the Secretary of State's office, hey, I'm out of prison. I understand that the citizens of Florida said I should be able to vote. I'd love to vote. I'd like to, return to normal life and have it part of my civic duty. This one article over at Daily Kos talks about this one guy who got out of jail back in 1999. I mean, he's been a good citizen for 23 years now, and he just got arrested. He was in his front yard washing his car, and then DeSantis' police show up and say, "Okay, buddy, off to jail with you. You're illegally voting." And he's like, they told me to do this. They told me to fill out the forms. They told me it was okay. And this is just wrong. All this is a naked attempt on the part of Ron DeSantis in his desperate effort to want to become president. And hopefully Charlie Crist will knock him off his little pedestal this fall. But this is nothing more than Ron DeSantis trying to terrify basically the black population of Florida, which is substantial, into not voting. Trying to convince black people in Florida that if they do vote, there's a very good chance that they're going to end up in jail. And he's running this for all it's worth, and you got Republicans who are behind him. He's using millions and millions of dollars of Florida tax dollars to run this scam, this operation, against the will of the majority of Floridians. And yet somehow he thinks this is going to help him win the election. He is not doing this. He's not putting black voters in jail because he's trying to get more Republican votes, although it may help slightly. He's doing it to try to scare the hell out of black people. This is called voter suppression, naked voter suppression. And frankly, I think if it's not legally criminal, it is morally criminal. It is the antithesis of what you want to have in a democracy, where the whole idea of demos, of democracy, is the will of the people. The first three words of the Constitution, we the people. The Declaration, by the consent of the governed.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And DeSantis doesn't give a rat's ass about the consent of the governed. He just wants power. And if he's got to scare a bunch of black people away from voting, that's what he's going to do.
We're reading today from Warrior Is by Harley and Robin Zephyr. It's the story of their great-grandfather who, in real life, killed Custer at Little Bighorn. And in fact, there's a map of the war, as it were, the battle. And they say that he is now the spirit keeper of Custer, which is remarkable. And there's a page-and-a-half introduction to the book, and then it becomes, a historically accurate novel, basically. This story is the traditional and cultural account of the life of Nikogju Lakota warrior Mato Nyanpi, saved by bear, which his name in English, also later known as Scarleg. Warrior is based upon a true story. What you are about to read has been told to us through our family, passed down as oral history from generation to generation. Every family has its own story. This is ours. It's up to you to visualize and experience the events described herein in order to determine what you believe or what you choose to accept from what you learn from these pages. You've likely never read a story quite like this before. In Warrior Is, the reader is able to visualize and experience the events and circumstances of Mato Nyanpi's life. Many times the story is told in the present tense, such as if you were walking with Saved by Bear and his people as the events unfold. This was our original manner of storytelling. Other times the story is narrated in the past tense to account for a past perspective. Those of us who may not be entirely fluent in particular words or specific language as much as we may be fluent in spirit and honest communication, the life messages many times can be more meaningful than just the written or spoken words. Warrior Is follows the timeline from the time of creation, moving through Saved by Bear's birth in 1849 and going up to July 1876, 2 weeks after the Grass Battle. Please exercise your free will and follow your conscience when reading this story. The spiritual side is called upon you to open your spirit so that you may read this tale and learn about these events through your own spirit. And, continues sort of like in that line, but here, right to the book. Prologue. He smelled the yellow of the sun. His spirit was alive and energetic. He felt the energy in his chest and all along the blood running through his veins. He looked to his left to see his great friend by his side. The strong scent of sage caressed his nostrils and reminded him of home. The movement over the high-running hilly ridge to the south caught his eye. He and Swift Bear sensed and felt the pathway opening up. So much had occurred so quickly, so suddenly, so dramatically. Their call to duty, his call to duty, filled his mind, his heart, his spirit. Today, it was meant to happen. It was presented to the people from the Creator. The plan was made. The warriors summoned. The preparation was done. It all led to this place, this portal in time. The sparse clouds to the west resembled mare's tails, and for a brief moment he remembered his white stone friend in the White Mountains. He remembered his spiritual commitment to protect his people, Grandmother Earth, and the sacred Hisapa. And time stood still for a moment, a small moment in time, through all of the ancient and original history of all the moments of time. And as the group of the horse-mounted soldiers rode briskly over the far ridge, the Creator shined that warm, nurturing light upon these warriors, such as Creator had been doing since the beginning of time, since the beginning of Grandmother Earth and Grandfather Sky, and at the beginning of all things. All the moments of time forever had arrived here, now. It had come to this. Creator's strong will and great invisible hand had placed them here. It was the Creator all along. It always was. It always would be. For one to know what led the young Lakota warriors to be here at this fateful site near the Greasy Grass River on this warm, sun-drenched day, one must go back in time, way back to the beginning, when it was only the Creator, and the Creator of all things decided to create a new world. Her name would be Unsimaka, Grandmother Earth, and she would be created to hold and sustain life. All kinds of beings, all kinds of people would be given and placed upon and within her to show her love of life. And this is how it all began. Chapter 1, Origin. The human beings evolved from the spirit. Before arriving in Wind Cave, we were star people. Many of us came from a place called the Pleiades, the Seven Sisters, an ancient star grouping and constellation that contains worlds comprised of the gift of life-giving water. Water is life, Mini Wikoni. The Pleiadian influence is an absolute, but those of us who claim to be relatives of the Pleiadians share a common bond with other indigenous people, regardless of where we are geographically on the earth. We will always remain Pleiadian star people. Spiritually, we have become human beings of different races and ethnicities, but the origin of our spirit is the water. And for us, and as to who we are, as the tribal people in a family way, our name is Minkoju, its evidence. It means life's subsistence through the gathering and planting by the waters and or river. The Minikoju spend their lives living by the waters. This is something that many of our own people do not know or understand, but this is our history. Not only of our physical existence, but also the history of our spiritual existence on Unsimaka. The book is Warrior Is by Robin and Harley Zephyr.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. A fellow over on Twitter, Paul Ferry, put together an amazing Twitter thread with clips from newspapers starting in 1894. In 1894, the newspaper was saying, nobody wants to work anymore. In 1905, nobody wants to work anymore. In 1916, nobody wants to work anymore. The story is a little more than that, but I'm going through this quickly. 1922, what's the cause of unemployment and hard times? Nobody wants to work anymore. 1937, orchardists complain of shortage of labor because nobody wants to work anymore. 1940, nobody wants to work anymore, says the governor of Wisconsin. 1952, nobody wants to work anymore. 1969, Sunday segment on the TV news titled Nobody Wants to Work Anymore. 1979, and then, he goes to 1981 and 1999 and 2006 and 2014 and 2022. Yeah, we've been hearing this for a long time. There's a whole video clip about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Oh, my goodness. What is the proper response to a garbage ruling from a questionable judge based on unsound reasoning, writes Private Jarhead over on Daily Kos? This is from one of the footnotes on Judge Cannon's decision. She's the Trump-humping judge who just said that the FBI has to stop what you're doing and set aside those 11,000 documents you took from Mar-a-Lago. You can't look at them until we find somebody who can evaluate them all to determine if there's executive privilege. Because Joe Biden hasn't said that Trump doesn't have executive privilege, which, by the way, is a lie. Biden has already said, but anyhow, this is one of the footnotes. Footnote number 15 from page 17. On the current record, having been denied an opportunity to inspect the seized documents, Plaintiff Trump has not formally asserted executive privilege as to any specific materials, and here's where it gets wild, nor has the incumbent president upheld or withdrawn such an assertion. In other words, Biden. It's simply not true. It's literally simply not true. How could she have missed this? I mean, it's just, this is a big problem, shall we say, at the very least. Anyhow, let me pick up your phone calls here. John in Chicago. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
I wanted to talk about the politicization of the courts. I agree with you that Judge Cannon's decision was completely political, not based on legal reasoning whatsoever, and I think that we should be thinking about Moore versus Harper, the Supreme Court case, where they're going to decide whether state courts can actually adjudicate election law disputes. What really frightens me about this case is that state judges have to either be appointed by a governor or be elected statewide. They're not subject to gerrymander, whereas the state legislatures are. I am frightened that they're using state gerrymandered legislatures to control national politics, and that's what this is all about. And I think a lot of our problems are actually due to gerrymandering. So I've gotten this on Strict Scrutiny's podcast, and I just wanted to make that comment.
Yeah, it's a deficiency of democracy, essentially. And Moore v. Harper could essentially rewrite how the decisions around the Electoral College, among other things, are made, and it's a very, very dangerous case that I'm not optimistic about. Coming down the road, I wrote an op-ed about it maybe 3 months ago over at HartmannReport.com. But yeah, I'm with you, John. These are very, very dangerous times. John, thank you for the call. George in Cripple Creek, Virginia. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm glad you recovered from your surgery so quickly.
Thank you.
You were talking about the 14th Amendment and the amnesty that applied to all Confederates except those who took up arms against the U.S.
Right, in Congress.
Yeah, that doesn't have been applied uniformly because, somebody like Fighting Joe Wheeler was a Confederate Army commander, and he was a general in the U.S. Army during the Spanish-American War and the Philippine insurrection, and John Mosey of Mosey's Rangers was the State Department consul in Hong Kong. So I was wondering, do they have to take a loyalty oath, and do they make exceptions in those cases?
I don't understand your question, George. I'm sorry. What am I missing here?
You're saying,
these people were not Confederate generals, and they were not traitors. I mean, or were they? What did I miss?
Yeah. Like I say, Joe Wheeler was a Confederate Army commander.
Oh, so this was back in the day. Okay.
Yeah, back in the day, right? Yeah.
Was he excluded from action, or was he allowed to remain in his position?
Yeah, he's like I say, he served as the U.S. Army General.
Well, probably the Amnesty Act covered him. I mean, it wasn't exclusive to members of Congress. It also covered ambassadors and senior officials. There was also in 1970, Congress. What is the word? Retrospectively or retroactively, essentially pardoned Robert E. Lee.
Right. Yeah, I remember
which
that.
is pretty weird.
Yeah, I agree with you. All those representatives you mentioned who participated in insurrection should be expelled.
Yeah, the difference between this case in New Mexico, where the guy was actually convicted, and many of these members of Congress who just gave basically support to the enemy, as it were, is that there's not a large enough body of evidence yet to really go after these members of Congress. And that assumes that there will be, if there, as the investigations go on. I may be wrong on that. It may be that they were just, cheerleaders, and if so, then okay, let them keep their seats. But Lauren Boebert tweeting, the location of Nancy Pelosi in real time. That's scary stuff. I mean, it's just not right. It's just not right. George, thank you for the call. I gotta move along, but thank you for it. It's always nice to hear from you. Jim in Phoenix. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, not very much. I'd have a whole lot to talk about if there wasn't a Patriot Act still. If I'm not mistaken, what do we need that for?
It's a good question. I was not a fan of the Patriot Act when it was passed. It was passed, I think, the year before we started this show, wasn't it? 2003? Maybe it was 2002. Yes. I don't recall.
Right before, yes. Halliburton still has more rights than we do. I even had it written into the Constitution with the money is free speech.
Yeah, so that was the Supreme Court.
If I don't have enough money, I don't have enough free speech. But, I mean, I don't want to sound so sarcastic, but Governor death sentence of Florida, DeSantis, is also much worse than Trump, as you have said. But as long as we got the Patriot Act, how are we going to stand up and do anything when we gave up our rights?
Well, what part of the Patriot Act are you concerned about?
Yeah, okay.
What part of the Patriot Act are you concerned about, Jim?
Well, for the fact that I can't do my constitutional rights. The First Amendment, they got locked up. They got me locked up with the Patriot Act. So how do the people stand up to make all these changes that we talk about?
I'd have to go back and read through some of the critiques of the Patriot Act back in the day. I mean, it's been law. It's been tweaked, but it's been law for 20 years now. You're not going to believe it. It even allows for torture, and we go along with it. Well, arguably. I don't think so. I think that's a misreading of it. But, yeah. Okay, Jim, thanks for the call. Kevin in Santa Rosa. Hey, Kevin, thanks for listening to KNYP. What's up?
Hi. Okay, I'm calling about your conversation with Alex Lawson and the Trust Act. Since this was in the Senate, we should filibuster it. If we want to get rid of the filibuster, one way to do it is make it get in the way of the oligarchs. Yeah, well, I think I can guarantee you that it will be filibustered by Democrats if it ever gets to the point where it's even on the floor. This is Mitt Romney doing performance art right now. And I think it's extremely unlikely that this thing is going to pass. But you never know. You never know, because there actually is a good-sized handful of Democrats in the Senate who are taking big bucks from the big banks. And it's the big banks, of course, who want to blow up Social Security. They want all that money in their accounts rather than in government accounts. And then, of course, you got the so-called corporate problem solvers caucus in the House of Representatives. People like Josh Gottheimer who are just enthusiastic about taking money from corporations and doing whatever they want. So it is a problem. It is. Kevin, thank you for the call. Margaret in Eastchester, New York. Hey, Margaret, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, glad you're healthy. God bless. I wanted to say that Pennsylvania, where I originally lived, is a state that has living in it an imam from Turkey who Erdogan has been trying to get back and extradited for a long time through our court.
I'm familiar with the story, yeah.
And I'm can't figure, why did Oz make all these twisty-turny convolutions to get into the state of Pennsylvania? He is a Turkish citizen. Is there a connection?
That's an interesting question, Margaret. I don't think as the senator from Pennsylvania he would have any more or less power over the federal government releasing that imam to Erdogan. This is a guy that Erdogan views as a participant in the uprising against him back in the day, which caused him to declare martial law and make himself president for life, essentially.
Correct. I'm just wondering if the connection with Oz pulling the lever for the governor would also allow the Republican, God forbid, Republican governor to in some way take care of this imam.
I'm surprised that the fact that Oz is a citizen of a foreign country, he's a citizen of Turkey as well as a U.S. citizen, hasn't been more of a big deal in the election. I guess Fetterman is just trying not to sound like he's a xenophobe, and good on him for that, I suppose. But
well, it's equally upsetting that he's actually in New Jersey. But
there you go. Yeah,
thank you, Tom. Best wishes.
Thank you, Margaret. Yeah, the other day, Oz made the comment. I was born just south of Pennsylvania, and then Fetterman tweeted a map. What's just south of Pennsylvania? New Jersey. What a surprise. We'll be right back with your calls on the other side of this break. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Fair and only slightly unbalanced. I'll be right back with your phone calls right after this. And welcome back. Mark in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Am I coming through okay? I had some issues with
just fine.
Coming through. Okay, good deal. Hey, regarding Medicare Advantage, I went on that 2 years ago, and I'm paying about $20 a month. And if I was to be on the Medigap, it'd be $230 a month.
You're right.
And the Medicare Advantage has a total out of pocket of about $6,200. I think the Medigap is something like $2,000 or something like that.
Depends on which one you get. The one I have has zero out of pocket.
Yeah, and I'm wondering,
but it's a little more than $200 a month.
How do we work that math? For me, it's just an individual, $20 a month.
No, I totally get it. The Medicare Advantage programs, and this is what they've been selling, is typically they will lose money on the what would you call it, the fee on the monthly payment that you make. They will lose money on the premiums, is the word that the insurance industry uses, but they'll make that back up if you ever get sick by denying you care, denying you services, refusing to pay for things, refusing to approve things. The approval rate, the inappropriate approval rate is shocking. And it gets worse as you get older, as Congressman Pocan found out when his mother was in her 90s and she needed physical therapy. Her Medicare Insurance Advantage provider simply refused to pay for it, said no. Now, Medicare would have paid for it. A Medigap policy would have covered it. And so, people like yourself are really in a bind. I mean, are you going to save money on the front end? Because, I'm paying a couple $1,000s a year for Medicare and the top-of-the-line Medigap plan, right?
Yeah.
And I can afford to do that. But if I couldn't afford to do that, I might have to go for one of these cheapo Medicare Advantage plans, and then I would be at the mercy of a big insurance company, as I have been most of my life. And that's not a fun place to be. And frankly, I think Congress needs to fix this. They need to make it so that Medicare Advantage so that Medicare is less expensive, and frankly, they need to close that 20% hole so there's no need for a Medigap plan, and let Medicare pay for the whole thing. That was put in by conservatives back in 1966. That was the price that they paid for their vote for Medicare, or the price that they demanded of Lyndon Johnson for their vote for Medicare, was that there was still an opportunity for the insurance companies to make money on Medicare. And I think it's wrong, but I totally get what you're saying, Mark, and there's not an easy solution to this. And for somebody who's just barely living on Social Security, buying, real Medicare and a Medigap plan will break them. And, and it shouldn't be this way. It absolutely should not be this way. And it shouldn't be that people, in order to just be able to have health insurance, are having to sign up for crappy plans. and deal with for-profit insurance companies that don't, they have literally tens of thousands of employees whose only job is to figure out how to screw you, is to look for pre-existing conditions or to look for some way to say, no, you can't, we don't cover that particular cancer center, or we don't cover that doctor, or no, we're not going to approve that procedure, or no, we're not going to pay for that drug. I mean, it's just wrong. Mark, thanks for the call. I totally get it. I totally get it. And, I encourage everybody to have real Medicare and a Medigap plan, of course. And I get it that there are a lot of people my age who can't afford that. And I think it's a tragedy. I think it's frankly a crime, a moral crime, a political crime. It's 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Our phrase for the day is narcissistic collapse. This is what happens when a person like Donald Trump with severe narcissistic personality disorder can no longer maintain the facade of their own greatness. When the lies that they have used to build this facade begin to disintegrate, they either implode, typically through drugs or alcohol or other kind of semi-suicidal behavior, or even suicide itself. They typically either implode, or more frequently they explode. They start blaming everybody around them or whatever institutions they can to deny that the collapse is their own fault. They cannot accept the blame. It's part of their narcissistic personality disorder. And instead, they go after the institutions or the people who are pointing out their failure. In the case of Donald Trump, going after the FBI, going after the courts. Look out. This is going to get really, really ugly. I've got a whole long video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. 51 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Shay in Jacksonville, Florida. Hey, Shay, what's on your mind today?
Oh, you really don't have time. But
pick one topic, please.
Okay, so first of all, Tom, I'm really just so angry as a Floridian and as just a United States citizen that DeSantis here is, going after people because he does not want us to vote. It's the same thing that Scott did when he was in the governorship. He actually would, and in the Tampa Tribune, I talked to you about this before, they did an article on this. He would scour the rolls of people that had been incarcerated, and as soon as they, were sentenced and they went away, he stripped them of their rights, especially down in Broward County, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach counties. Any democratically leaning strongholds. He did that. Also, I just want to say one of the talking points. I want to ask people, if you plan to come to Florida, please don't. We need to do a boycott. We need to lift our voices in some meaningful, measurable way to push back, and also to support former Governor Chris, hopefully, prayerfully, the next governor of Florida.
Yeah, amen.
Secondly, I want to say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
No, I just said amen. Keep going.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Secondly, I would like to say, in response to the Republicans always speaking about voter fraud, I remember that prior to the 2020 election, several months before, when the House passed a bill that would have funded for new voting machines and other things that were put in for election integrity, and they voted against it. McConnell would not even bring it to the floor.
Yep.
These are the type of talking points that we need to utilize in order to combat the lies that they tell. And I just want to encourage everyone, please, 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 this is so important, that we really get out and do what we have to save our country.
Yeah, this is a pivotal election. And if
Yes.
DeSantis gets bumped off his perch by Charlie Crist becoming the next governor of Florida, that significantly diminishes the possibility that this neo-fascist is going to end up in the White House, which is, in my mind, a real threat. Shay, thank you very much for that. It's great to hear from you, as always. Cindy in Morton Grove, Illinois. Hey, Cindy, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to put this on your radar. So I live in the north suburbs of the Chicago area, and last week this newspaper showed up in my mailbox, and it looks just like, or it's called North Cook News. It looks like a regular free local newspaper. It's got sports on the back, and it's got an activities page, but it is this far, far right wing. I'll read you a couple of the headlines from the front. After Pritzker's school lockdowns, Cook County student test scores plummet. Remembering the lost sports season, and comments on the effect of the pandemic restriction on student athletes. 6 in 1 black students failing in Illinois four-year universities. And then coming next week, special crime edition, and it's got mugshots of black people above that headline.
Of course.
This thing is just so toxic. So I got a second copy today in the mail. Coming next week, special school curriculum edition. What are they teaching your children in school? And it has a picture of a cartoon drawing of a Hispanic adult in a pink dress holding a toddler's hand who's wearing a yellow dress. And then it has a picture of a black...
So basically it's Republican propaganda pretending to be a newspaper.
Yes, it says North Shore Edition.
Do you know
real
who publishes
data,
it? Is there a statement of who the publisher is?
All there is a website, www.northcooknews.com, and no publisher or information anywhere.
Wow.
There's a note from the publisher that is not signed by who the publisher is, and it's just, again, a little editorial of propaganda. Product of local government information services. That's what it says at the end of the publisher's note.
Have you gone to the website?
I have not had time to. I just wanted to put it on your your listeners' radar.
Amazing.
Freaking unbelievable.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Cindy, thank you. I'm sure we're out of time, but thank you very much for flagging that for all of us. Holy cow. These people have no shame, and they got a pile of money. I mean, just an absolute pile of money, because they got all these right-wing billionaires behind them, because they all want to keep their tax cuts and their deregulation. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It does require all of us, and that means you. If you can run for public office, do it. But at the very least, make sure, double check that you are registered to vote and they haven't bumped your registration or challenged it. We'll see you tomorrow. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. Have a good afternoon.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free, and you can sign up at ThomHartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. So check them all out at ThomHartmann.com and HartmannReport.com.
We say fight back!